Chapter 509. The Black Giant was the gathering ground of the mountains. He was the incarnation of war, the leader of the countless undead armies. In a way, he was also my new adopted son. When I returned, he had always been growing and gaining experience in the Northlands. However, he had matured without my help. Renee and Gleena had greatly influenced him. He was a graveyard demon, a mobile base for the undead. But now, he was a mobile city of war. The faceless man took a step forward and transformed back into a gigantic city of black soil. This was a floating city. The entire city was shrouded in darkness. Below the city, several earth elemental plane tower giants transformed into the vanguard of the undead army. They were also the pillars that lifted up the gigantic city. However, I knew that this was only the form of war's legs. He was an amalgamation of countless individuals, and he could also split into countless individuals at any time. Right now, the pitch-black fortress giants were the incarnation of the mountains. This pitch-black fortress blocked the undead army's path of invasion. The invisible city gates opened, and numerous silent undead walked out. Without a doubt, the two armies were now facing off against each other. Conservation's undead army was somewhat restless. The intelligent undead had never expected that they would meet their own kind. However, the undead army showed no signs of stopping their advance. War, don't let the small fries break through. War slowly took a step back as his army also reorganized itself. He and his army were only here to stop any random undead army that might appear. Perhaps I'm the biggest loser in the Hades. I had lost many things in the Battle of Hell. In order to create a new soul world, I had given up on my soul world, Eternal Definder, which had been my trump card forever. The new, frigid winter earth also became the foundational foundation of Hell. Even my God's Descent sheet was no longer possible due to Womian's complete independence. But I've gained even more. This was a battle that belonged to me. How could I allow war to steal my limelight? Besides, I finally had a chance to try out my new toy. This was a new world that I had exchanged for my soul world and frigid winter earth. Welcome to the land of Hades. How does it feel to return home? Isn't it great? There were no incantations or heart-wrenching screams. The entire world distorted. The black land transformed into a world without sunlight. Not far away, the river Styx was still slowly flowing. 4 pillars supported the sky. At the end of the mountain range, a group of silver palaces was currently interrogating the souls of the dead. The dark miasma of death began to strengthen the dead in this place. The low-level skeletons also gained a temporary intelligence, but they suddenly fell to the ground. The eternal slumber of death had made them instinctively fall into confusion and fear. They didn't know why they were here, why they had come here in confusion, why their soul shackles were in the hands of others. This was not a fake soul world. The aura of the netherworld and the land of death were all real. Bastards who enslave the dead, enjoy the vengeance of the dead. After I gave my command, all of the soul shackles were shattered. Under the laws of the Hades, the shackles of necromancy were nothing. The eyes of the low-level undead that obtained their freedom reignited a raging flame. The instant that they broke free from their shackles, they began to attack their former companions, or perhaps their master. You dare! An undead knight didn't even have the time to react before he was dragged off his horse by the skeletons and zombies that he had always looked down on. Countless skeletons and zombies tore at his flesh and tore apart his soul. The low-level undead's rebellion caused the entire undead army to fall into a state of panic. But this was only the beginning. Don't panic. These cannon fodder aren't anything. Even if we get rid of them, this place can't possibly be the true hell of the Hades. All of this is just an illusion. A winter demon who was roaring angrily was the vanguard of the entire army. He jumped into the low-level undead's cannon fodder formation and unrestrainedly unleashed ice that tore apart the undead around him. Only shattered bones fell to the ground. But what destroyed his illusion was that numerous souls that were no different from the living walked out of those shattered bones. These souls were excitedly guided by the towers of death to where their souls belonged. The winter demon muttered to himself in confusion at the scene before him. What the hell is this place? Yes, what the hell was this place? To be honest, I didn't even know what the hell was this place. This place was part of the Hades. However, it was impossible to reach the 4 pillars or the 4 halls of the Hades. This place contained the aura of the land of death, the river Styx, and the Hades. However, the river Styx created a self-contained cycle that made it impossible for anyone to leave this place. During the Battle of the Hades, I had given up on the Eternal Defender, and used the method of creating a soul world to create the Hades. In that case, logically speaking, was the entire Hades part of my soul world? The answer was obviously no. This new soul world that used Dragon World as its material and frigid winter earth as its core was an actual, real world. The 4 pillars and the 4 pillar gods were like nails that firmly fixed it in place. How could it possibly become an individual soul world? If that happened, wouldn't all of our efforts have been for nothing once I retracted my soul world? But I had indeed created a soul world that belonged to me. And so, this created a logical contradiction. If this had happened in He, this contradiction would have automatically been fixed by the dimensional laws. But as I died for the second time, I would lose my soul world. He was just like the void, and the Hades was also my territory. The 4 pillar gods were all on my side, so how could I possibly be at a disadvantage? The lack of dimensional laws caused this contradiction to sink into an endless loop. Not only that, we also had the goddess of law, who was the most skilled at finding loopholes in dimensional laws. I meant the goddess of order. How could she possibly let go of such a good opportunity? Under her guidance, as my soul entered the cycle of reincarnation, the entire region of the Hades was also brought into the cycle of reincarnation and bound together with my soul. Due to the existence of the endless loop and logical contradiction, this region was still a part of the Hades. It was still connected to the other regions of the Hades. In fact, the high-level existences of the Hades were even able to toss demon seeds, items into the Hades for me to use. However, they were unable to actually enter the Hades. This is a subspace overlapping point, similar to a parallel plane. It's a place that both exists and doesn't exist. Roland, you're such a lucky bastard to even be able to create such a concept that the magical world is still debating whether or not it even exists. This was Harlow's bitter evaluation. I directly treated it as a compliment. And so, with the goddess of order personally helping me find a bug in the Hades, this bug became my new ace in the hole. It also became a channel for me to communicate with the gods and demons of the Hades. Taste the wrath of the dragons. The abyss dragons who were surrounded by black fog were flying in the sky. They flew past the sky, and what they left behind was a dragon's breath that was filled with the aura of death. How is this possible? The winter demon general was hit directly by the dragon breath. The ice and snow that eternally covered him didn't melt, but his soul was forcefully dragged out of his physical body and forcefully dragged into the river Styx. The black dragon breath burned the land of death like raging flames. The undead that had their physical bodies destroyed could only be transported back into the river Styx by the pillar of death and then enter the cycle of reincarnation. Returning their souls to the cycle of reincarnation had always been one of the original rules of the Hades. The Hell Dragons were responsible for guiding the undead into the Hades cycle of reincarnation. Since you were the undead, even if you were unparalleled in the world and had an undefeatable physical body, you would still have to obediently enter the cycle of the Hades, unless you had already surpassed the mortal realm and the cycle of reincarnation, which would be the Undead Emperor. As an undead, you actually dare to challenge the ruler of the Hades in the Hades? Should I call you arrogant or ignorant? I told you that this is a battle where the strong bullies the weak, and this is only the beginning. Chapter 5:10. The undead army has stopped moving? When a single person started fighting against the undead army, it wasn't common knowledge that he was dragged into a different dimension. However, the fact that the undead army had stopped moving explained everything. For mortals, no matter what the reason was, as long as the undead army stopped moving, they would have more time to prepare, which was naturally a good thing. Meanwhile, on the city walls of Starwood City, Sulima, who was acting as the temporary commander of the undead army, was explaining his plan. The moment he said this, everyone around him started arguing and angrily questioned him. "You're telling us to stop working? At such a critical moment?" No, I'm only telling you to focus your attention on commanding the defending troops and preparing for war resources. Just leave the hard work of strengthening the city walls and equipping more weapons to defend the city to me. You're just a little brat who hasn't even grown his hair yet. Sulima stopped her subordinates from questioning Roland angrily. She even asked her own question in a tone filled with surprise and delight. "It's that person. That holy knight His Highness made the decision? Did he personally take action?" Timlad paused in surprise for a moment. However, the combination of Holy Knight His Highness and Holy Knight His Highness meant that she had guessed something. After hesitating for a moment, Timlad felt that it was better to be direct since he wasn't someone who liked to beat around the bush. "Yes, that person made the decision. He's currently blocking the undead army. As for how long he can block the undead army, he said that he can only do his best, but that he should be able to do it for at least 3 to 4 hours. Block the undead army? Even that person can only block the undead army? Is it impossible to directly destroy that undead army?" Timlad shook his head and didn't intend to explain further. Just what did an undead emperor who had thousands of years of experience mean? And what did an undead emperor who was leading an entire dimension mean? Undead emperors were existences that even main gods wouldn't be willing to challenge. Undead emperors were existences on a national level. But would things really be over just by destroying an undead emperor? The problem with the ruins hadn't been solved yet. New enemies could arrive at any moment. Timlad also knew that if that person had absolute confidence in victory, he wouldn't have asked Timlad to strengthen the city walls and construct defensive formations. "Time is of the essence. Let me handle this. Leave all the engineers to me, as well as the 4 elemental swordcasters. They can be half engineers and enchanters as well." Up in the sky, 3 super-small airships were already slowly descending. Dozens of medium-sized robots had already descended from their opened cabin doors. Their creaking gears were constantly changing their forms, adjusting them to the most suitable form for construction. The moment they landed under Timlad's control, they began to dismantle the magic crystal cannons on the city walls. These broken cannons wouldn't be of any use at all. "Right, my name is Timlad. You can call me Timmy or Demi. If I'd known this would happen, I would have brought the entire Nanda fleet with me." In the storm caused by the airship, the person on the city wall could only shout. As he shouted, he directed the airship to land. The next 3 hours would be the time for him, the miracle maker, to show off his skills. Iron Father? God's hand. There was no need to doubt the delight on everyone's faces. Even the veteran warriors who had just been scolding Timlad were now looking at him as if he were their savior. Only Sulima was filled with worry as she looked at the undead army in the distance. Someone who could make the strongest engineer in the world, the God's hand, obediently listen to him was proof of Timlad's identity. Even that person wasn't confident in his victory. Just how difficult would this enemy be to deal with? Sulima was also afraid. She had almost mistaken Timlad as a spy and started fighting with him. If they had really fought, I hope that person is as generous as the rumors say, and won't care about such small matters. Fine then, generous? Anyone who was familiar with Timlad would laugh out loud upon hearing this. Wasn't Timlad famous for being petty and petty? As expected, the rumors were unreliable at all. Weaklings should kneel on the ground. Unlike what others expected, I was having a much easier time fighting with the support of the Hades. This was the location of the dimensional contradiction. Even though the dimensional contradiction was connected to the Hades were unable to enter. I was also unable to leave. I had originally thought that the Hades would only be able to provide limited support, but I never expected that this dimensional contradiction would be an incredibly powerful trump card against the undead army. This was especially true for the basic dimensional laws of this dimensional contradiction. The low-level undead, the most troublesome part of the undead army, had all gone out of control. The mid-level undead had to worry about being dragged into the undead army. But soon, a tremendous will suddenly descended upon the undead army, causing the originally scattered soulfires to once again pulse at the same rhythm. This powerful will directly took control over the mid-level and high-level undead, who were unable to control the situation. The low-level undead were once again under the control of the undead army, and the low-level undead were once again under the control of the undead army. I could sense that behind the endless undead army, in the distant mountains, there was a powerful soul as bright as the sun watching me. An old acquaintance. Come out if you're unhappy. However, I didn't receive any reply from my soul. The only visible change was that the undead army had returned to order and was slowly advancing. Tisk, as expected, you didn't fall for my trap. Against an undead emperor with an entire undead plane, she would be the equivalent of a national-level combat strength. She would have an innumerable undead army under her command, and it would be impossible for anyone to win a battle of attrition. The simplest and most direct method of dealing with this situation would be to directly kill the leader of the undead army. Although killing the undead emperor in front of the undead army would be impossible, at least in theory, it would be much easier than first destroying her army and then killing her. But it was obvious that the undead emperor, who had changed her name to an undead emperor, had no intention of personally attacking. She was only constantly sending her cannon fodder to their death. This wasn't because she was cowardly. This was the correct decision of someone who was undefeatable. If I was in her shoes, I would have made the same decision. The silent undead army slowly advanced. However, their target wasn't me alone. Instead, it was the dimensional space behind me. It was obvious that they had noticed something. Pitch-black magic dragons flashed past in the sky, their black flames scorching the ground again. The hell dragons in the sky bombarded the undead army yet again. This time, the undead army was prepared for this, so they suffered far fewer losses. You've already noticed? The weakness of this dimensional space. Yes, this dimensional space had a weakness, and an obvious one at that. Compared to an ordinary soul world, this dimensional space's advantage was that it was a real world. In fact, it could even be used as a warehouse or a base. Not only that, it wouldn't be affected by the dimensional laws of this world. I didn't even need to use mana to maintain its existence. However, if I used it as a soul world to obstruct my enemies, it would have an obvious fatal weakness. This dimensional space isn't a soul world. It's a natural region with unconventional existences. It has a border, but it's unable to stop others from entering or leaving. I had chosen to create my dimensional space on this mountain path in hopes that the narrow mountain path would be able to stop the undead army from invading. This was also the reason why I had send out an undead army behind me to stop any undead from escaping. Actually, it was only natural that the undead would be able to discover this weakness. After all, this dimensional space was limited in size. Not all of the undead army would be able to enter this dimensional space. Since the undead were able to enter and leave this dimensional space, it was only natural that the undead would discover this weakness. And I couldn't just watch as the undead broke through my dimensional space. Compared to an undead emperor's personal army, war was still far too inexperienced. That was why I used yet another trump card, a trump card that I had prepared for several years. Although I won't be able to catch a big fish, I'll eat some small shrimps first. Come out, Yongye City. The dark clouds in the sky suddenly parted, and a black floating city slowly descended from the opening. These cities were shrouded in black mist. These cities were the residences of war and the habitat of the undead. The most obvious feature of these cities were the tall, pointy towers. The tallest tower was emitting a boundless aura of power. Not to mention the magic power level of these towers surpassed that of semi-god mages. Even titans couldn't compare to them in terms of the intensity of their magic power. Silly cat, prepare yourselves. 3, 2, 1 Tactical super magic. Undead return. When my voice combined with my magical pets, I borrowed Harlow's hands, who was sitting in the tower's control room. The Mage Tower's mana booster increased the power of my black magic spell, gathering all of the city's mana to support it. Finally, a gigantic black magic ball appeared in the sky, just like a black sun. This low-level undead magic spell, which was supposed to cause low-level undead to return to dust, transformed into a tactical forbidden spell. Pitch-black light shone down from the top of the tower as the black sun slowly descended. Even the light from the outside possessed boundless destructive power. Any undead that came into contact with it were instantly reduced to dust. Those souls obtained freedom once more and happily escaped the battlefield. That's right, Yongye City, this floating city, was my mage tower. Boom. Suddenly, a pillar of light struck the top of the tower from behind the undead army. Although it didn't pierce through the floating city's defenses, it caused a tremendous explosion outside of Yongye City. That's at least several dozen kilometers away. How did she do it from so far away? Her super magic spell actually didn't cost her any extra mana. Right after that, there was another flash, proving that Conservation's attack hadn't been a coincidence. Conservation was indeed capable of transcending the limits of space and attacking from such a long distance. Boom. But this time, that flash of light was directly detonated. The Mage Tower's interception system had been activated, and a scorching ray directly ignited it. It would seem that she's even stronger than before. Although I was saying that I was astonished at Conservation's power level, I felt a mysterious excitement that made my blood boil. As expected of an undead emperor, she was capable of casually overturning all existing magical theories and turning the impossible into reality. This was such a familiar battlefield. The cannon fodder would fight in the front, while the archmages would bombard the enemy from the back. This was how undead mages fought. Last time, we weren't in our complete forms. This time, let us properly fight as undead emperors. Chapter 5:11. Dark incantations echoed in the air as numerous silver-white ancient runes appeared in midair. Buff, protection, curse, and instant death. My dark castle was actually protected by the light, which was so frightening that most people would drop their glasses. That is, if the undead had glasses. Yongye City was a floating city with a total area of 21 square kilometers. Just looking at its size, it could only be counted as a medium-sized city. However, it had alchemy laboratories, potion laboratories, mage towers, and other facilities. This city had been constructed according to the most basic functions of the Cloud Tower. This city had a total population of 3 Harlowy swore, and if you counted a certain goddess, that would count as 4 people. That was because Yongye City was located in my personal world, which was a part of the Hades. The aura of death here wasn't something that ordinary people could withstand. What I was most proud of was the total cost of constructing this tower. 5,000 gold coins. Yep, that's right. It wasn't 50 million gold coins, nor was it 5,000 platinum coins. It was 5,000 gold coins. It's so nice to have so many friends. Everyone here is a good person who loves to help others. Actually, there's probably no one more shameless than you. Are you certain that those people won't chase you to the ends of the earth? Heh heh, can't you see that I haven't shown myself yet? Find me first. Yongye City's foundation was a floating city that the wind elemental god had stolen from the winged tribe. The main tower was Aso's mage tower in the cloud tower. The secondary tower was partially a soul tower that Aso had created himself, and the other was Harlois and Amelia's inheritance. As for the laboratories and other main facilities, they were all stolen from some friendly mage organization, rented for free for a long period of time. Yongye City's large area, numerous victims, and high-level robberies had broken all records in history. This was also the reason why the bounty on a certain person's bounty list kept increasing exponentially. It was said that after a certain person left, the maps of the Cloud Tower and the Shilua Empire's mage districts were completely redrawn. Similar angry roars kept echoing in the wind. Roland, you'll die a horrible death. Not only did you steal some scrolls and casting materials, you actually stole my residence and mage tower. It was difficult for the bystanders to understand why those famous archmages, great liches, and great sages would shed tears without a care for their image. Some even knelt down and roared angrily at the sky. However, at least the name Roland had become the nightmare and public enemy of all spellcasters. Let's not talk about those annoying things anymore. It was their fault for setting up so many magical traps and mechanisms. Since I couldn't open them, I might as well just take my home with me. Getting back to the main topic. How could a mage not have a mage tower? After I finished dealing with those troublesome matters, I also wanted to create a small mobile home for myself. Since this was my first mage tower, I naturally wouldn't use random parts to fill it up. If I was going to make it, I would do it all in one go. If he was going to snatch, he would snatch the best. Magic library? And a large-scale star chess deduction platform? Marguerite, a certain saint, gifted it to me. Anyway, she won't have time to read for a long time, so I'll help her digest it. An observatory and a giant constellation. The Church of the God of Fate gifted it to me. What a kind person. At any rate, their true gods have entered the Hades, so they won't be able to divine fate by observing the stars in the future. Are you sure that directly driving a cloud tower and taking away the church's main observatory was a gift? Are you sure that those Puzzle Knight, the god of fate's holy temple knight, who's been frantically searching for you, are here to thank you? Do you dare to meet the god of fate himself? Of course. I don't dare. Hey, weren't you the one who strongly requested for a good observatory? My divination magic is terrible. If it weren't for the fact that you needed to see the stars, I wouldn't have needed such a high-level observatory, would I? If I'm the main culprit, then you're the accomplice. The silly cat instantly fell silent. She then changed the topic to the tallest secondary tower in the city. Soul Summoning Tower? That was indeed gifted to me by Reinhardt of the Shilo Empire. It's a gigantic soul summoning tower that's more than 300 meters tall. A single soul summoning spell can probably destroy a country-level graveyard. He actually gifted such a country-level strategic equipment to you to play with. He must really dote on you. What do you mean dote on me? This is my personal charisma. Little Reinhardt respects and trusts me. He believes that giving this tower to me will make it even more useful. This is trust. Do you understand? Trust? What about this holy light shield? You took away the entire Saint Levant Cathedral. How did you manage to establish a relationship of trust with the Pope? And that ancient tree of life, if I'm not mistaken, belongs to the Wood Elves. Back in the day, the ancient cloud tower that I purchased from my system was only a model. However, the tower's actual abilities far surpassed the blueprint. That was because every single component of this mage tower was the best in the world. And now, even though I was facing off against another undead emperor's official army, I felt incredibly safe and comfortable as I calmly cast spells in this sturdy mage city. Conservation sent out 3 more long-range attacks, but they were all blocked by Yongye City's defenses. The outer runic defenses didn't even waver in the slightest. Seeing that she was unable to achieve any tangible results, she unhesitatingly gave up on attacking. Currently, the glorious Holy Light runes came from the Holy Church's friendly gift to the Holy Church's Holy Relic Storage Hall. With the support of the Holy Church's kind-hearted people, this defensive barrier was made purely of holy light. It was incredibly effective against undead magic, especially negative energy damage. Boom. Conservation's ambush failed yet again. It would seem that I wouldn't have to worry about long-range attacks for the time being. Although the cloud tower was small, it was complete. This cloud tower was definitely the most practical mage tower in the entire world. It was all thanks to the kind-hearted people here. Thank you, my old friends. Actually, according to ancient customs, after the mage tower is completed, we should invite those who helped to build it as well as your friends to witness the ceremony. At the very least, we should drink some champagne and set off some fireworks. Are you certain that you really invited them, that they didn't drink my blood, and that I wasn't the one tied to the fireworks and sent to the heavens? I casually responded to the silly cat's teasing. Actually, she had helped to build this mage tower as well. Many kind-hearted people's information had been provided by her. She definitely wouldn't have a good time if I had been captured. Not a single mage would be able to resist the temptation of a mage tower. After all, it was common knowledge in the magical world that only a mage with a mage tower would be a true mage. A mage would be able to fight against the gods in a mage tower. A mage without a mage tower would be nothing more than a coolie, living out in the open. Even a small thief would be able to steal their wallet and life. The usefulness of a mage tower was self-evident. A mage tower was no longer just a residence for researching magic. It was a fortress on the battlefield that allowed mages to cast spells without worry. It was also a magical stone that allowed mages to truly use 3000% of their combat power. Tactical super magic replenishment, counting down 3, 2. Tactical super magic had always been criticized by many people. Tactical super magic was only useful for expanding the effective area of a spell that had a limited area of effect. If one wanted to increase the spell's area of effect, they would also need to use other super magic spells. On a small-scale battlefield, tactical super magic spells were often costly and ineffective. However, on a large-scale battlefield, tactical super magic spells could transform ordinary small spells into trump cards that could change the balance of power on the battlefield. Number 1. Activate tactical super magic spell. Ice Wall. I swiped my finger on the map I created, and a simulated ice wall appeared on the map. Meanwhile, many mage towers outside of Yongye City lit up, and a snow-white light gathered on them. Finally, all the white light gathered at one point, accumulated, sharpened, and then shot out a white torrent. Snow-white ice flowers floated in the sky. The undead army that wasn't afraid of the cold forcefully broke through the ice wall. However, wherever the white torrent passed through, an ice wall that was 5 or 6 meters tall suddenly appeared. Finally, when the white torrent disappeared on the other side of the map, Yongye City's energy reserves had been reduced by 7%. Meanwhile, a wall of ice and snow had appeared in front of the undead army. Blue and green soul lights flashed in the undead's empty eye socket. Their master had ordered them to forcefully break through the ice wall. It seemed that this was indeed the correct decision. After all, the undead weren't afraid of the cold, and the ice wall itself didn't have any damage abilities. As long as the undead could pass through the ice wall, they would be able to break through. Many undead were on guard as they stared at the ice wall in the sky. However, to everyone's astonishment, the ice wall didn't attack. But soon, a strange change occurred for the undead that were trying to forcefully climb the ice wall. They moved slower and slower until their bodies were frozen solid, and even their soul fires were frozen solid. These undead included low-level skeleton soldiers, as well as high-level liches and death knight. However, it didn't matter how long they were frozen solid. The high-level undead, who were supposed to be terrifyingly resistant to ice, actually had their souls frozen together with them. This abnormal scene caused all intelligent undead to feel fear. Are they stupid? They actually dared to touch my ice magic creation, and even stayed on top of it for so long. The hibernation chill was a passive ability of my ice magic. When they came into contact with the ice wall, the hibernation chill attached to the ice wall would silently wrap around them, slowing down their senses and finally putting them to eternal sleep. Of course, I wouldn't be so foolish as to be like those retarded villains. Even though I clearly had the upper hand, I would still go into chatty mode and explain my abilities and weaknesses to my opponent, causing my opponent to die in confusion. That would be the true definition of evil. Just as I was preparing my second spell, Conservation's counterattack came. Chapter 5:12. From a certain standpoint, my duel with Conservation was a typical mage style. Careful observation, probing attacks that didn't aim for success, but only to avoid making mistakes. Careful observation of Conservation's weaknesses, defending against Conservation's probing attacks, and so on. Of course, there was also the sudden final attack that was more than enough to take Conservation's life. That was why a duel between two mages would usually be quite boring. Mages would first summon cannon fodder and cast defensive spells to make sure that they were undefeatable. Only then would they begin casting spells to probe their opponent's weaknesses. They would either destroy the enemy's cannon fodder or try to remove the enemy's defenses. The first to expose one's own weaknesses would be the loser. In that case, if it wasn't for the fact that there was a tremendous difference in power level, it was possible that a duel between two academic mages would last for 2 or 3 hours. Since most of the mages' attention was focused on defense and personal safety, the duel wouldn't be very interesting. But even though this was a normal mage duel, my duel with Conservation was slightly different. The ice wall created from snow received repeated attacks. Even the vanguard of the undead mysteriously transformed into ice sculptures. However, the remaining undead didn't retreat. That was because undead creatures lacked fear to begin with. They didn't care about morale at all. The will of the undead lord was above all else. Charge. Step on your own kind. The undead army's inexplicable will converged into a will that was almost corporeal. It was as if there was an invisible skeleton lord howling in the void. That high-level undead knight climbed on top of his subordinate's corpse and was the first to reach the top of the ice wall. But before he could celebrate his success, he was instantly transformed into an ice sculpture by the frigid air beneath his feet. But the next instant, his undead knight acolyte stepped on his corpse and also transformed into an ice sculpture. Then, another skeleton general stepped on her corpse and advanced. Even though this was a bottomless abyss that silently devoured everything, the undead army continued to advance unwaveringly, as if they were man-eating ants that nobody dared to stop. If it's a river, fill it up. If it's a volcano, extinguish it. Although it seems quite foolish, it's indeed a practical method. After all, magic also requires energy as a source of energy, and energy will eventually run out. That's the most basic law of magic. Since it was a spell that required physical contact to be effective, then I would just use corpses to isolate it. If it was a spell that could spread, then I would use cannon fodder to consume all of the curse and negative energy. If it was a spell that was limited by its functions and rules, then I would use cannon fodder to test out all the rules. This was the reason why the undead army was able to sweep through the various countries. No matter how powerful or exquisite a defensive spell was, as long as there was enough cannon fodder, even the most exquisite spell would have its limits. Even the most powerful mage would die of exhaustion. The Black Flood always moved forward slowly. It seemed slow and sluggish, as if it could escape with just a few steps. However, it was impossible to stop it. No matter where it escaped to, the result would be the same. This was the undead calamity, the king of pestilence that everyone viewed as death itself. But in this battle between undead emperors, this was nothing more than an appetizer. She had as many cannon fodder as she wanted. Of course, I had my own way of dealing with conservation. But before that, I needed to deal with conservation's magical attacks first. Conservation had finished casting her spell. A pitch-black cloud flew over from the distance, but it instantly shattered into pieces when it got close. The cloud instantly enveloped the entire cloud city, filling the entire city with a black mist. The black cloud before me wasn't an offensive spell. It was a layer of pitch-black mist with countless dark elves circling around and fantasizing. It was impossible to tell which direction was up or which was down. The lack of vision and sense of direction made all attacks seem like nothing more than a joke. A special spell? Yep, I've probably never seen this before in the mortal plane. It's probably a special application of negative energy. It's even capable of blocking out the detection of the soul. This mist has the scent of souls. It's probably a sacrificial divine art that uses undead subordinates as sacrifices. Using soul shards to block out the detection of the soul? That's quite a creative idea. I nodded in agreement. My inference was pretty much the same. Having an encyclopedia was great. Many inferences could be instantly verified. In that case, since I knew the general principles behind this spell, I should be able to find a way to deal with it. Purify, no absorb. Using a soul magic spell in front of a soul magic master? That's ridiculous. Under my command, the national-level soul summoning tower in the center of Yongye City was fully activated. The soul shards in the mist weren't even able to resist as they were directly absorbed by the soul summoning tower. The mist of death that blocked vision actually became a new source of energy for the cloud summoning tower. The cloud summoning tower's energy had dropped from 90% to 92%. Even though I had the upper hand, I couldn't help but feel anxious. I'm afraid that she's already prepared her next spell. This was the difference in tempo between mages. An undead emperor with an undead army was also capable of casting spells. This was basically the equivalent of me taking one step for every 2 steps she took. A novice would probably be delighted at being able to nullify the enemy's attack, while I would have a headache because I had lost the initiative. I knew that once the tempo was pulled away and the advantage accumulated to the point where I was unable to deal with it, that would be the critical moment to decide the victor. There was a difference from the very start. Her undead army's actions were also a threat to me. She had plenty of cannon fodder to use right from the start, while I could only deal with her every move. The further I went, the more difficult it would be to deal with her. This meant that I would have to simultaneously deal with 2 of her moves for every step I took. As I expected, where did this big guy come from? Right after the black mist dissipated, I saw a gigantic bone giant that had already stepped over my ice wall. This bone giant had originally been heading in our direction, but when he noticed that the mist surrounding the cloud city was beginning to dissipate, he unhesitatingly gave up on attacking the city before him and immediately changed directions to break through this abnormal world. Bone giants weren't a rare type of undead soldier. Both an innate giant's body and an acquired giant's bones could create such killing machines. High-level undead mages would usually create such undead creatures to attack cities. After all, bone giants were both conspicuous and slow. Not only would they easily attract troublesome opponents, they would also consume a tremendous amount of energy. It wouldn't be worth it to use them against small targets. No, this isn't an ordinary bone giant. But compared to his slow companions, this silver-gray giant was very agile. The frequency at which his feet moved was so fast that it created intermittent seismic waves. His eyes were not flickering with the soul fire of the undead, but with a sapphire-embedded magic diamond probe. His other eye was also emitting a red light that looked like infrared. He wasn't holding a giant sword or battle axe, or any other type of cold weapon. Instead, he was holding a spear that was emitting scorching flames. I could even see the traces of screws and welded plates at the critical points of the spear. His body was also covered in steel armor, and on his feet, I could even see support wheels and a flamethrower. Undead Gundam, did I come to the wrong theater? Is this the new species that the dragon Lich mentioned? I could faintly sense that this bone giant's body contained many independent souls. This bone giant was actually nothing more than a vehicle. The pilot's cabin seemed to be located in his abdomen. This was obviously no ordinary undead magic. At the very least, an undead emperor who had been hiding in the undead plains for so many years wouldn't be able to create such a combination of magic and engineering. My first impression of this bone giant was quite terrible. Not only was it powerful, but its appearance meant that the most troublesome situation was about to occur. The undead had either obtained the Halettum Plains inheritance, or they had allied with the owner of the inheritance. Our enemy was no longer just an undead emperor. Perhaps it was because Yongya City had far too much energy, or perhaps it was an absolute order from its higher-ups, but this bone giant, which was obviously our ace, didn't intend to fight to the death against Yongya City. It passed through the ice wall and simply continued advancing forward, attempting to break through our defenses. Tim Lad will probably like such a gift. Of course, that's only if you can accept it in its entirety. Of course. Any ordinary powerful individual would have been scared half to death by this. But in the eyes of experienced individuals like us, this bone giant was nothing more than a toy. Not only that, it was an unimportant toy with a failed design. Tactical magic. Stone to mud. This spell smashed into the bone giant, instantly transforming the flat ground into a swamp. There was even more swamp beneath the swamp. It was too late for the bone giant to stop in time, so it suddenly jumped up, flames spitting out from its feet. It charged, exploded, and swung its leg with great force. This was a standard long jump, and then it somersaulted in midair before landing in a crater. Pfft, nice movement, but it didn't jump up at all. Of course. Bone giants don't have any muscles. It's already the limit for them to use magic to walk. They're only mimicking human movements because they're instincts. Does they really intend to do a long jump? Do they really think that this bone giant is some unscientific red jipper that can increase its speed by 3 times just by being painted? However, I didn't celebrate too early. High energy signals in the distance indicated that conservation had prepared yet another new spell. Some of the undead below were already breaking through the ice wall. It seemed that our tempo had fallen behind. Undead were crawling all over that ice wall. The Eternal Legion's spirit of sacrifice was truly moving. And so, I unhesitatingly put up another ice wall. Learning from my previous lesson, I made it 2 meters taller and 3 meters wider than the first ice wall. Keep going. Let's see how many cannon fodder you have. Although I sounded quite arrogant, I was actually rather unconfident. Ice walls like this that contained ice energy would consume far too much energy. Each time I used it, it would use up almost 10% of Yongya City's total energy. In order to ensure Yongya City's safety and combat strength, I didn't dare to use less than 50% of my energy. I wouldn't be able to use this ice wall tactic many times. The most annoying thing was that he couldn't allow his opponent to maintain the initiative. He had to deal with every move that came his way. The situation would only become more and more disadvantageous. We would need time to counterattack. I'm going to the secondary tower. Leave the magic battle against conservation to me. You go and clear out the cannon fodder first. For once, Harloise was being diligent as she volunteered to take on this heavy responsibility. Her strategic decision was obviously correct. Since conservation was too far away, and it was impossible to eliminate her, it would indeed be a good idea to use the strategy of Tianji's horse race to suppress conservation's weak points and eliminate the annoying cannon fodder first. She's an undead emperor. We should at least be careful. Even with the Mage Tower's support, it would still be quite difficult for me to face off against an undead emperor by myself. Invisible curses, dimensional sealing spells, and special negative energy permanent damage would all be enough to kill Harloise. However, Harloise smiled. She slowly transformed into her human form amidst her bell-like laughter. Her silky blonde hair trailed on the ground. That familiar and beautiful face was right in front of Roland. Her breath smelled like orchids, but she intentionally caressed his ear. Undead Emperor? Who do you think I am? Who taught you undead magic? I'm the woman who's already taught an undead emperor. Now that I've accumulated enough, I'm also the woman who's about to become an undead emperor. Be careful of her? I'm hoping to obtain a chance to make a breakthrough in battle. Harloise transformed into a phantom as she giggled. I could now focus on the undead army below me. It was indeed quite reassuring to have such a trustworthy helper. What should I prepare next? It'll be best if I can use a powerful spell that can kill off all the mid-level and high-level undead in one go. Since I have the Mage Tower's energy reserves, I might as well use up some of them. Chapter 513. This was different from the Knight's Charge, which would make one's blood boil just by watching. This was also different from the Thieves' and Rangers' jungle battles, where every second mattered. Mages were famed for their rationality, and this was more like a chess match. And in a chess match, the more chess pieces there are, the better. The stronger the chess pieces are, the better. The more times you can move, the better. Currently, two armies were facing off against each other. Conservation and I were like the royal generals in a chess match. I was protected by Yongye City's thick defenses, while Conservation was far away. It would be far too difficult for her to damage the main body. Naturally, she could only focus on destroying the other chess pieces of the opponent. This obviously wasn't a fair match. From the very start, Conservation had far more chess pieces than I had. Not only that, my movement range was limited, and I couldn't allow any undead to pass through. This meant that I was at a disadvantage. But now that Harloise interfered, the scales of victory seemed to tilt in my favor. Black lights clashed in the sky. The resulting whirlwinds from spells were usually evil winds and ghostly howls. It was obvious that neither side was using any honorable spells. I couldn't even recognize many of the spells being used. But at the very least, I could tell who had the upper hand. The silly cat is doing quite well. That's right. Even I hadn't expected that Harloise would have such an obvious advantage. She was gradually gaining the upper hand in this battle. But when I carefully observed the battle, I felt that this was only natural. No matter how Conservation was able to cast spells from such a long distance without losing any damage, it would be impossible for her to bring her own mage tower to the mortal plane. Right now, she didn't even have enough time to construct a soul tower to replenish her mana. That meant that all of her spells would have to rely on her own mana. Meanwhile, Harloise had to rely on the support of her super soul summoning tower and all of Yongye City's mana pool. This meant that she would be able to cast spells without losing any mana before the entire city's mana pool was completely depleted. Harloise had the reputation of being the omniscient one, so it went without saying that she had a deep understanding of magic. There was basically no magical subject that she wasn't proficient in. As a gold elf with astonishing natural talent, she had obtained many secret elven techniques, and she had also worked hard for tens of thousands of years under the influence of her hatred. If it weren't for the fact that the success rate of becoming an undead emperor was far too low, and that the triple barrier between myth-ranked undead and semi-god emperor was far too difficult for undead who didn't have their original physical bodies, she would have taken this step long ago. But now, Harloise had made up for the flaws in her physical body and soul. She was now truly close to that level. All of her previous hard work wouldn't go to waste. Her pure magical techniques and experience were even above Conservation's. She was able to rapidly analyze Harloise's spells, search for weaknesses, and cast spells to counter them. Harloise's fighting style was quite impressive. This kind of battle makes me think of a powerhouse using a rich account to bully normal players? Yes, that's it. It's a godly conclusion. Harlow's experience and techniques were far superior to Harlow's. Not to mention, Harlow's mana was free to use as much mana as she wanted. Even if Harlow's power level was slightly higher than Harlow's, they would still be relying on their own mana to cast spells. It would be quite easy to use a pay-to-win item to smash Harlow's to death. Was there anything more shameless than this? I never expected that we would one day become pay-to-win players. It would seem that all of my hard work wasn't in vain. My sponsors didn't waste their efforts either. How does it feel to be suppressed even though you're clearly stronger? Conservation is probably furious right now. If it was me, I would probably flip the table in anger. This was a pay-to-win player bullying an expert with godly equipment. A mage with or without a mage tower would be completely different. Not to mention, Yongya City was no ordinary mage tower. 99% of mage towers couldn't be moved. That was because their heavy energy pools were basically impossible to move. The fact that it was easy to absorb energy from the earth and volcanoes also made it impossible for ordinary mage towers to move. The elemental pools that stored elemental energy from other dimensions were basically coordinates that couldn't be moved. Even though the ancient cloud tower was capable of moving over short distances, it would usually stay in one place and not move. That was because moving the cloud tower would require a tremendous amount of mana. Every time it was activated or anchored, it would require a series of relocations and connections, which was truly troublesome. Yet, I was able to use this bug-like world to make it possible for Yongya City, a super mage tower, to be carried around with me. It was also because of this inconceivable fact that the unlucky people who were killed here hadn't been prepared for my free-moving ability. They were probably still wondering how I had managed to move their houses. Getting back on topic, the pay-to-win player Harlow's was getting better and better at fighting. All of Conservation's spells were intercepted by the skilled player Conservation. The silly cat even had the energy to deal with some of the undead. If it weren't for the fact that she couldn't pinpoint Conservation's location, she would have even had the energy to counterattack. Since I was certain that Harlow's had a huge advantage in the short term, I had even more energy to focus on whack-a-mole. That's right, whack-a-mole. That was exactly what I was doing right now. The undead army kept advancing forward. Anyone who stuck their head out would receive a cannon blast. The lucky survivors would either retreat or be completely annihilated, and the next undead would have to stick their head out again. Eat my tactical super mana fireball, damage increasing fireball, long-range fireball. Actually, this game was quite boring. However, since the undead were quite self-aware of their scattered formations, they could only keep tossing out fireballs in order to conserve as much mana as possible. What? Why didn't they just use a high-level spell to clear out the undead? That would also be a good way to clear out the undead. Since the undead had disgustingly high ice resistance and wouldn't foolishly let your ice breath stick to them, and since the undead didn't need to fear the cold and didn't have any body temperature, the cheap fireball spell's advantage was quite obvious. Fireball, large fireball, enhanced fireball, delayed fireball, super long-range fireball, and chain fireball. No matter if it was a novice or an archmage who specialized in a particular spell, not knowing how to throw a fireball would be looked down upon. After all, this was simply a simple and crude method of detonating a mana block and manipulating the fire element to create AoE damage. Every mana block would create 10 points of damage. In terms of cost-effectiveness, this was much better than 99% of high-level spells. It was a must-have spell for mages when it came to traveling, killing. Novice adventurers didn't need to know any support spells, and they didn't need to be as smart and calm as mages. However, they absolutely couldn't not use a fireball spell. What? Too boring? Alright, let's change it up. We'll compress the mana even more, so the explosion will naturally have a larger AoE. Let's call it flame explosion. You guys did a good job. Thank you. But I'm sorry. Good job. Sorry. Good job. Sorry. 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 My apologies filled with evil intentions echoed in the air. Numerous flame explosions the size of washbasins rained down, smashing the undead that stuck their heads out like rat. If an undead general that looked like a rat was hit, the flames from the explosion would devour everything around it. Although I wasn't an expert in fire magic, I still knew how to toss out fireballs. Smashing rats was too light? Wasn't that an appropriate description? Alright then, since whack-a-mole wasn't appropriate, the undead players were harvested like freshly ripe chives. It seemed that I had accidentally taken advantage of something again. Can't you be a little more serious? Toss out a high-level spell or something like that. Don't you know forbidden spells? Although I had the advantage, I was unable to eliminate Conservation's main body, which meant that this battle would never end. The silly cat was also under a lot of pressure. She was rather annoyed to see me having so much fun. Tossing a forbidden spell at legend rank? Are you complaining that you didn't die fast enough last time? The difference between forbidden spells and ordinary magic was the foundational understanding and control of the natural laws. Forbidden spells were a fundamental change in magic. Pure mana accumulation wouldn't be able to help me withstand the backlash of a forbidden spell. It was possible to toss out Ice Aeon with Yongye City's support, but no matter whether or not the undead army would be completely annihilated, I would definitely be forced to reincarnate. Don't you know any other large-scale AoE attack spells? I remember that legends have quite a few that can be used. Death's Howl, Banshee's Curse of Despair, 5 Fingers of Death, also known as Death Slap. Yep, they're all undead magic. Are you sure you want me to cast negative energy healing on them? I'm using control-type undead magic specifically for the undead, and I'll need to fight against the undead's undead lord, not to mention that the undead are a close subordinate army of an undead emperor. It's not worth it. What about ice magic? It's not like you don't know that the undead are naturally resistant to ice. The low temperature that would be fatal to the living is just a way to keep them fresh. Are you sure you want me to make them look fresher? The silly cat was rendered speechless. It wasn't impossible to create a super low temperature that could freeze the undead, but that would require far less mana than just throwing fireballs at them. It would seem that you're nothing more than trash as a mage against the undead. Harloise was indeed correct. Of course my power level would be reduced if I fought against the undead. After all, an undead emperor would never think of another undead emperor as her imaginary enemy. However, Conservation had the exact same problem. Our undead magic, negative energy resistance, and ice resistance were all quite outstanding. Even her most powerful magic spells would be reduced in power against us. How could I have ever imagined that I would have to fight against another undead emperor? My only enemy would be the undead from the very start. Besides, in normal situations, if I meet an undead that's difficult to deal with, I can just cast Holy Light. Oh right, Holy Light. As a Holy Knight, of course I could use Holy Light. However, using a Holy Knight's fearless charge against such a sea of undead would basically be suicidal. However, Holy Light wasn't only limited to melee combat. Yongye City had already plundered many churches of the Holy Light Church, and the Holy Light Church's holy relics were more than enough to host an exhibition. As long as I had enough mana, it would be quite easy to convert Holy Light into Holy Light. However, that was only in theory. If I wanted to use my mage towers to cast Holy Light Divine Arts, I would first need to solve many technical problems. At the very least, I would need to determine which divine art model to use, and then figure out how to convert mana into Holy Light. While I was busy calculating the energy conversion formula, Conservation, who had been suppressed to the point where she couldn't even breathe, finally took action. She requested reinforcements from her temporary ally, and soon, a new batch of half-undead, half-constructed undead entered the battlefield. This time, there were more than 100 bone giants that resembled Red Zagu. Conservation was still casting a spell, but this time, it wasn't an offensive spell. Dark clouds floated over again, but this time, the dark clouds didn't float towards Yongye City. Instead, they covered the bone giant's gigantic bodies. Conservation discovered that most of her spells had been blocked, so she rationally gave up on directly attacking Yongye City. Instead, she focused on buffing and supporting her subordinate. The dark clouds that covered the undead also blocked our line of sight. Even though we were skilled at harvesting the undead, there was nothing we could do if we couldn't see our targets with our flame burst spells. Since we can't see our targets, let's use AoE spells. This time, let's go all out. Let's hurry up. Double casting means double the energy consumption. We don't have much energy left. While the two undead emperors' second battle was about to determine the victor, Starwood City also reached the golden time to reinforce its defenses. Numerous steel sentry towers were erected. The sinister-looking scorpion-shaped crystal cannons on top of these towers gave everyone an instinctive sense of danger. Timlad had just demonstrated to everyone how he could instantly refine raw ores into iron. The already reinforced city walls were now covered with yet another layer of iron. However, the great engineer Timlad had no intentions of stopping. He was currently melting Starwood City's Night Domain Lord statue. He had already completed the foundation of a gigantic catapult. The ammunition and principle behind this catapult would definitely be far more than a simple kinetic bombardment. Meanwhile, in the plains of the Sala Dukedom, the royalty's reinforcements had already received a new report of the situation. Several hundred horse-drawn carriages kicked up a cloud of dust. It was quite obvious that they were hurrying over here. Several hundred kilometers behind them, several black-cloaked figures were also speedily approaching that direction. They were holding a certain person's arrest warrant. It would seem that a certain person's identity had been exposed. Judging from how the leader of the group was so angry that her beautiful face was distorted, a certain person was in for a big laugh. Chapter 5:14. Holy light is the power that purifies chaos and distortions and turns them into order. The power of holy light, which had risen to prominence in the last holy war, received a new interpretation in this holy war. In the Southern sect's newest holy Bible, the first pope who interpreted the Southern sect's teachings directly abandoned the Holy Church's belief that holy power was blessed by God and that holy power was blessed by God. Instead, he used a simple and direct method to explain what holy light was. Holy light itself is a type of incredibly powerful positive energy. Its core is purification, and its manifestation is the forceful transformation of chaos, distorted creations, energy, and existences into order. This explanation was closer to that of alchemists and mages. According to the first pope of the Southern sect, holy light, which had previously been a divine item bestowed by the gods, had become something ordinary enough to be researched. Even the audacious archmages had long since come to such a conclusion. However, ordinary devout priests and holy knight holy light had completely changed their worldview. If this was a materialistic world of nature, this would probably be nothing more than a few different religions' doctrines. However, in this world where wills existed, many things would be different. In the past, holy knight and holy light priests would only pray to the gods and desire holy light's bestowment. That was why they would improve incredibly quickly after receiving holy light's bestowment. However, not understanding the holy light would also mean that their foundations would be shaky. No matter how powerful someone else's power was, it would still belong to someone else. After reaching a certain level, they would naturally be stuck unless they truly met a god's favorite and continuously received divine power. When a certain prince obtained the title of Son of Holy Light, that was only because he miraculously reached legend rank at the age of 14. The main reason why he was able to reach such a level was because of his unique understanding of holy light. But now, the holy light salvation incident in the Bardi Empire's eastern plains caused countless holy light job class members to reconsider the definition of holy light. Believers of the pure holy light religion had spread to every corner of the world. From holy light bestowed by the gods to a special type of power, many mages were even beginning to research holy light, treating it as a type of pure special power. Holy light had fallen from grace. Perhaps this would affect the venerated status of holy light job class members and some holy light job class members, but it would have a profound effect on the overall usage of holy light. In just the past 7 years, when the shackles of thought were broken, it was as if a treasure trove of wisdom had been opened. With the tremendous number of holy light masters in this world to begin with, countless new divine arts and new technologies were created. This was the fact that the holy light theories resonated with each other, further breaking the shackles of thought, finally leading to a revolutionary change. After all, sometimes, the furthest distance from the truth was the closest worship and wild belief. There were many things that weren't impossible or unthinkable, but rather, they didn't dare to think about it and wouldn't think about it. At this moment, the city amongst the clouds had opened its own shadow canopy. In the sky garden on the top floor of the city, on the ancient tree of life, many seeds were condensing. The branches were covered in a golden radiance, and the roots and branches were like crystals. Liquid energy flowed within them, and the seeds were maturing rapidly. The crystal gradually expanded, and slowly pressed down on the branches. Seed of holy light, this wasn't an original spell of my own. It was a new divine art created by the Southern Church's priests in recent years. Fine, they copied it as well. The principle behind this spell was Drul's seed of life. However, only the priests who had immersed themselves in the holy light for several decades would be able to fuse a spell from a completely different system into their own. Although this spell was someone else's, I was probably the only one capable of using it to its full potential. After all, I have a second-generation ancient tree of life here. This is a top-level item that even the kingdom of the elves doesn't have many. How did you get it? I stole it. I had a proud expression as I gave her a thumbs up. Considering my relationship with the elven kingdoms, I didn't feel any pressure at all about stealing from them. Although the silly cat seemed like she didn't care, she was actually the one who told me the ancient tree of life's location and how to enter the forbidden area. As long as she could see, those ungrateful bastards with long ears, suffer misfortune, this former elven princess would be more enthusiastic than anyone else, even if she was also a forest long ear. At this moment, this incredibly rare second-generation ancient tree of life was displaying its astonishing power. A tremendous amount of holy light energy was poured into it, and numerous holy light crystals started forming on its branches. 47%, 46%, 44%. We're already below the danger level. Should we continue? Let me know when it reaches 30%. We need to keep at least 10% of our energy reserve. Even though we were using the Winged Tribe's floating city, we still had to pay an additional price for overloading our equipment and facilities. 20% of our energy reserves wasn't even enough to keep Yongya City afloat and defend against the sky. A tremendous amount of energy was being converted into the power of holy light. The ancient churches and holy relics that we had stolen from the Holy Church were the best conversion tools. But even so, the conversion efficiency was still no higher than 70%. As more and more seeds of holy light appeared on the branches, our energy reserves were starting to run low. Conservation unhesitatingly attacked us even more when she saw the changes on our side. Even though Harlois successfully intercepted the seeds of holy light, our energy reserves kept running low. Damn it, this floating city's energy reserves are still too small. I need to find a bigger one next time. I recall that this is the backup energy reserve of the Mage Country's cloud tower, isn't it? It's probably the strongest mage tower in the world. Where else would you like to rob a better one next time? The real Titan's heart? Good idea. Let's rob the Titan giants next time. They're currently living on my land, so it's about time they pay some rent. Titans' hearts are truly eternal energy sources? Isn't that just a fake legend made up by some outsider? I don't know if they're truly eternal energy sources or not, but if we catch a Titan and toss it into a power plant, we definitely won't have to worry about a lack of energy anymore. Doesn't that make a completely harmless, perpetual motion machine? While we were still vexing over our lack of energy, our energy reserves had already fallen to 34%. At this moment, the sky above Yongye City had completely opened up. The Tree of Life's main body was still here, but its light incarnation had already covered the entire city. From a distance, the gigantic Tree of Light was even larger than the entire city. Countless branches of light reached into the clouds, making the floating city look nothing more than tiny flower beds. The Tree of Holy Light's frightening energy waves could easily destroy any detection device. Even an idiot would realize that the situation was far from good. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful the undead army on the ground was, they couldn't do anything to us. Skeleton archers and ordinary necromancers couldn't attack us from such a high altitude. Most of the gargoyles and bone dragons from the undead calamity were already harassing Starwood City. The remaining undead didn't even dare to approach the Tree of Light. The only threat to us was the undead Emperor's long-range attacks. Boom. This time, Harloise, who had been intentionally conserving her energy reserves, was unable to successfully block Conservation's attack. Judging from where the smoke was coming from, Yongye City had lost its third negative energy source: recording studio, swimming pool, and a candy warehouse. Fine then, I admitted that the last few losses weren't that big of a deal. A candy store running out of stock would only cause a certain someone to be displeased. However, the loss of the negative energy source further increased our lack of energy. 27%. 25%. Release it. We can't hold on any longer. Release it. This isn't enough. This level of power isn't enough. There's no helping it even if we take a risk. While I was worrying, a beam of light descended from the sky and directly struck the Tree of Light. Before I could even react, the Tree of Light suddenly grew even larger. Its branches reached all the way into the clouds. If it wasn't for the fact that the world was concealing us, it was likely that even Starwood City would be able to see this gigantic Tree of Light. Meanwhile, in the starry sky, at the top of the Hades, the golden pillar of holy light of salvation, I could faintly see a tall figure waving his hand at me, as if he was trying to tell me something. What is he saying? When I saw that familiar figure, I thought about how he would likely forever remain in the Hades. Even though I tried my best to remain calm, I still felt uncomfortable, as if something was missing in my heart. It was obvious that he saw that something was wrong with us, so he directly sent reinforcements. We were so far away from each other that it was practically impossible for us to see each other. It would already be quite good if we could even see each other's figures, let alone read his lips. However, we were still able to communicate with each other. A certain half-slime creature was one of the Hell Kings who guarded the Inferno, and had left countless incarnations in the Hades dimension. Harloise, can your incarnation go over there? Harloise, everything is Harloise. You're Harloise when you need me, and you're the silly cat when you don't. I still have to deal with that guy, so I don't have the mood to deal with so many things. Fine, I apologize, but we have more important matters to attend to right now. Can you send an incarnation over? He's already here. He's saying be careful, head. What? Harloise's voice became softer and softer as she spoke. Even though our soul connection shouldn't have such a bad connection. The next instant, Harloise suddenly sped up and finished speaking. I came to a sudden realization, but I regretted coming to such a realization too late. Head, be careful of your heart. You're trying to screw me over again. A black wind whistled past my head. If I hadn't lowered my head in time, my head would have probably been split into several pieces. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the black wind directly smashed through 2 houses and finally stopped. It was an ancient silver warhammer. The light of salvation, the hope hammer of the envoys of light? This warhammer had once been a holy knight's warhammer that had been passed down from generation to generation. However, during the Battle of the Hades, it became a holy artifact that carried the soul of holy light. I left it in the Hades as the foundation of the 4 pillars of light, and it became the symbol of the god equipment of the pillars of holy light. Now, when I met with trouble, it once again fell into my hands, and almost smashed my head into pieces. The ancient silver war hammer silently lay there. The ancient scars on it were a record of history. However, I had no intention of picking it up. I wouldn't be able to lift it even if I wanted to. Harlois, is there something wrong with the style again? We're clearly at war. Shouldn't we be more serious? There's nothing wrong with the style. Haven't you always been a comedy character? Hey, that can't be right. I'm supposed to be the main character. Look at my identity as the prince of a country, my identity as the avenger, and my identity as the savior of the world. No matter how you look at it, I'm the male lead of an epic opera. I'm not a comedy character at all. Opera? The superstar Princess Peach? I heard that the fairies have already sold images of your opera all over the world. Even your opera fans are asking when you're going to make a comeback. You have an undying idiot body for comedy main characters, you look better in female clothing than in male clothing, you're constantly flirting with women, but you're still a virgin. You're a perfect example of a comedy main character. Let's talk about the war instead. But before I could even look at the warhammer, our tree of holy light received support from the Hades pillar of holy light. It was finally time for our tree of holy light to bloom. It was also time to activate the super divine art that consumed nearly 40% of Yongye City's energy. Asterisk ding. Asterisk all the golden crystals on the tree began to shake. The faint resonance caused everyone's scalp to go numb. Those holy light crystals, each the size of a person, were the seeds of the tree of holy light. The next instant, countless seeds scattered everywhere. The seeds drew strange arcs in the sky as they suddenly descended like meteors. This was the majestic sight of a meteor shower. Countless golden meteors rained down like a torrential downpour. Every strike caused a massive explosion of holy light. But this was only the beginning. New tree of holy light sprouted and grew from the crystal seeds. In just a few short seconds, the tree of holy light transformed into a new tree of holy light. Then, even more seeds appeared. Soon, the seeds of holy light spread throughout the entire battlefield. This pitch-black land was now covered in a golden forest. Any undead that came into contact with a tree of holy light would be directly burned to ash. Even the specially crafted bone giants would find it difficult to move through this forest of holy light. But this still wasn't the end. Explode reality. With a snap of my fingers, a tree of holy light in a corner of the battlefield exploded. The glorious golden light directly devoured everything around it, creating a flower-shaped golden mushroom cloud in the sky. The next instant, all the intelligent undead's cold expressions revealed inconceivable despair when they realized what was about to happen. Asterisk boom. Boom. Asterisk numerous trees of holy light exploded, causing numerous flowers of holy light to ignite in the sky. Golden crusaders stood upright in the direction of the explosions. Their souls' screams of despair became the accompaniment to the continuous explosions. Finally, when the whole world turned golden, there was only white in front of me. At this moment, even the faraway Starwood town could feel the violent shaking of the ground. I could see the golden devil flower slowly blooming, which pierced through the clouds. It was quite beautiful as a flower made of pure energy. The top of the flower pierced through the clouds, and its golden petals gave off a feeling of holiness and nobility. However, it was still nothing more than a mushroom cloud from an explosion. The even more dangerous shockwave was already upon us. The residents didn't even have the time to rejoice before the undead in the sky were wiped out by the explosion. The pitiful scene before them made it impossible for them to guess what had just happened. The mountain is gone, the entire mountain is gone. Chapter 5:15. Starwood City had once been a mountain city. The people here had once relied on the mountain to survive. Yep, in the past, there was a loud bang. Oh my God, the whole mountain was gone. Yes, and the entire sky became bright. It wasn't a sunny day like usual. It was as if countless oil lamps were on top of the clouds. The entire sky was lit up. Oil lamps are nothing. I feel like there are countless suns over there, and there's also that golden flower. It's so scary. Even though they were facing a war, and even though it was now late at night, adventurers would never lose the interest in gossiping. This was especially so with such an earth-shattering explosion happening not far away from them, which made them feel even more anxious, yet also filled with anticipation. I heard that it was caused by our people. Of course. Didn't they say that the enemy was the undead? Let's see if they can bring out their holy light. Humph, I heard from the temporary command center that the undead were supposed to arrive this afternoon. But with such an explosion, not only did they suffer heavy losses, the entire mountain path was destroyed, so it's unlikely that they'll be able to come. At the very least, we'll have one more day to prepare for battle. Most of the time, it would always be good news before battle. Not a single qualified commander would leak information that would affect the morale of his troop. And a sudden victory would naturally be greatly exaggerated, which would be used to boost morale. After receiving news of the vanguard battle, Sulima unhesitatingly sent out spies to spread the good news of victory in the taverns and alleys. But when considering the frightening number of zeros on a certain person's wanted poster, the only news that could be spread was that the Holy Light Archmage had just passed by and helped out. Starwood City had now been reinforced many times and could barely be called a mid-level city. The city walls where the undead were most likely to reach had been forcibly raised to 12 meters tall. Thick layers of iron had also been added to the walls. Even though this still wouldn't be able to defend against gigantic bone giants and bone dragons, with sufficient defensive equipment, even a low-level sea of skeletons wouldn't amount to much. And right now, the Holy Light Archmage, who everyone viewed as their savior, was also in a tavern. However, he wasn't as proud of himself as he usually was when he heard all the praises about him. Instead, he seemed quite vexed. I've suffered a huge loss this time. I sat in a small private room of the bar, drinking to drown my sorrows. Listening to the bragging of outsiders, I was quite annoyed. The seed of Holy Light's forbidden spell was only a theoretical design that had just appeared. No one knew exactly how powerful it would be before it had been tested. However, this afternoon's appearance would probably make its name known far and wide. Pure holy light actually has such powerful destructive power. Looks like this is a new topic worth researching. Conservation's army within range was completely annihilated. The shockwaves and overflowing holy light even reached Starwood Town, killing off many of the undead aerial units in the sky. I still couldn't remember the name of the mountain range behind me. I would probably have to change its name as well. Perhaps something like Holy Radiance Plains would be more suitable for it. After all, the entire mountain had been flattened, so calling it a mountain range would be a joke. A single explosion source wouldn't be able to achieve such an effect. This is probably a special effect of holy light resonance or a chain reaction. I'll have to research the specifics later. The silly cat was quite delighted. She had collected a lot of information and data during the explosion, and it seemed that she had some new ideas. For an archmage who was stuck at a bottleneck, nothing would attract her attention more than new knowledge. Perhaps I should thank the Hades for their assistance in holy light. The power of this explosion far exceeded my expectations. Originally, I had only intended to stall for time. With such powerful holy light, even conservation's legend-ranked undead winter demons were instantly vaporized. It was even more so for the other low-level undead. When the entire mountain range was flattened by the shockwaves, I couldn't imagine how those weak skeleton soldiers could possibly have survived. An undead plains undead army would be nearly limitless. However, such a loss would also hurt the undead emperor's heart. At the very least, she would need to reorganize her army, which would give the living precious time to prepare themselves. The longer the battle dragged on, the more advantageous it would be for the living. However, I was quite vexed by the fact that I had lost quite a bit as well. The energy level is only 14%. Where am I supposed to find mana to replenish it? Extraordinary power also meant extraordinary energy consumption. As that endless flower of holy light bloomed, Yongye City's energy level rapidly decreased. It was already quite fortunate that the city hadn't been destroyed. However, the battle was still ongoing, and it would be difficult to find a backup energy source. And that wasn't even the most important loss. The most important loss was probably the good little boy War. As a good child who obediently listened to his father, War had been working hard for me in the rear defense line, hunting down some undead that had escaped. However, War himself was still an undead, and he hadn't been far enough away. All right then, there was no need to say anything else. War had been directly purified by the holy light at such a close distance. It was fortunate that he was an amalgamation of human consciousness, which was why he hadn't died on the spot. Even if he hadn't reached the point where he would have to go home and revive, it would be impossible for him to return to the battlefield for the time being. There's going to be a battle soon. Sufficient souls, especially powerful undead souls, will help War recover. However, there's really no way to replenish energy. Right now, Yongye City was doubtlessly one of my most important trump cards. Even as a strategic weapon, it would be foolish to face an undead emperor and her entire army by myself. Strategic magic used up a tremendous amount of energy, and a mage tower that didn't have enough energy reserves would be no different from a mage without mana. Should I go capture those magic swordsmen and steal their magic swords and miniature energy pools? That won't be enough. Even if I steal all of Yongye City, I might not even have 10%. Should I use Timlad's small battleship's engine and energy source? That'll be another 10% at most. It'll be a waste of aerial combat strength, which is the most scarce resource right now. It's not worth it. Find archmages to fill it up. Fine, I know it's unreliable. How many semi-god archmages do we need to fill it up last time? 26, or perhaps 260 myth-ranked archmages. It'd be great if we were in the mage country. We could just find a few mage organizations and get a dozen laborers. That wouldn't be enough. If we were in the mage country, we could just drug the truth overseers of the Truth Symposium. Those truth overseers are far more powerful than ordinary semi-god archmages. I tossed out all sorts of ridiculous ideas that seemed to be legal. Although I didn't feel anything, the listeners around me felt quite uncomfortable. That was because Sulima, the highest-ranked commander of Starwood City, was also here. It would be far too arrogant to discuss all sorts of illegal ideas in front of her. But right now, she could only smile wryly. After all, she also knew about my past. And if it wasn't for my interference, it was likely that Starwood City wouldn't even have lasted until nightfall. Old Barton and Catalina were also here. The old mercenary's face was filled with bloodlust and even contained a faint murderous intent. It seemed that something was wrong with the situation, so I asked him about it. I just killed a few scum who were planning to take advantage of the situation. What kind of situation is this? You're still thinking about such ridiculous things? When the undead invade, your first thought isn't to protect yourself, but to take advantage of the situation to rob merchant guilds and steal women. Barton lowered his head and drank half a glass of beer. However, His expression was still filled with indignation. Meanwhile, his daughter's current appearance was quite strange. She had a nervous expression as she looked at everyone around her. She was so scared that even a waiter from the bar who brought her food would make her stand up. Did I come to the wrong place? Discussing such an important matter with a girl like me? No, I wanted you to come here for something. I looked at Catalina with great interest until she embarrassedly lowered her head and counted her fingers. Another benefit I obtained from the battle was that I now had a new understanding of how Catalina existed through the bone giant samples. Perhaps this would be a good research direction. At this moment, the private room's door suddenly opened. A shirtless Timlad walked in. He used a towel to wipe his sweat as he lowered his head and apologized. I'm sorry, I'm late. The city gate's reinforcement took 26 minutes longer than expected. I brought good news this time. Yep, that should count as 2 pieces of good news. However, there's also bad news. The great engineer with an exhausted expression directly sat down by the door. Good news! We have additional powerful reinforcements. I just received news that they'll probably arrive even earlier than the Solid Dukedom's reinforcements. Their power level is definitely trustworthy. Them? When I heard the word them, I had a strong ominous premonition after having been scammed so many times. A mysterious sense of danger made me want to break into a run. What's the other good news? Wait a moment, tell me what the bad news is first. Timlad nodded, but his face was filled with a naughty smile that harbored malicious intentions. The bad news is that they received information from the letter you sent me. Reinforcements probably aren't their main goal. Their main goal is to get even with you. Who? I paused in surprise. If it was the name that I had in mind, I would probably be considering how to escape right now. Renee. She even brought her personal guards with her. Their power level is definitely reliable. I paused in surprise for a moment upon hearing this, but then relaxed. She was just a little brat who hadn't even grown her pubic hair yet. What was the big deal? Although I seemed to have helped her out in the past and tossed the heavy responsibility of the Mist Kingdom to her without saying anything, wasn't that the same as thinking highly of her and training her? TSK, get even with me? This little brat's finally grown up. Alright, there's also good news? Yep, apart from Sister Renee's reinforcements, we have even more powerful reinforcements. Who? Sister Renee knows that she won't be able to stop you by herself, so she directly told Granny Amelia. Sister Amelia. And Sister Amelia is the type of person who takes action, so, you know. I slowly stood up and walked outside. The little brat, who had already transformed into a muscular man, blocked my way with an evil smile on his face. Boss, don't take the responsibility and run away. You know how they'll deal with me if you run away. I'm still hoping that they'll put in a good word or two for me in front of my sister. Cough, cough, what about the mortals here without you? They still need you to protect them. I'm not running away. How can this be called running away? The aliens are coming, and even the undead emperors are coming. I'm going to find a phone booth, eat a plum, and transform into Ultraman to save the world. Chapter 5:16. It was a dreamlike city, with people wearing strange robes and even stranger glasses. They lived in a steel city filled with tall buildings. It was a miracle city filled with gears and tracks, with strange sculptures and even stranger machines everywhere. But even Catalina could feel that life here was better than it was now. There was no need for people to fetch water from a well with a wooden bucket. All they had to do was turn on the pipes in their own homes, and they would have clean water. The streets and alleys had abandoned the oil lamps that always emitted the stench of smoke. Bright crystal pillars lit up the world. Those crystals were similar to the magic lamps that had become popular recently, but they were brighter and cleaner. Even the slight roar of machinery and heat could not be felt. When people traveled, they didn't rely on carriages or their own feet. Strange boxes and discs replaced carriages. As long as one entered one of these boxes, one would quickly arrive at the desired location. There were colorful crystals everywhere, and the streets were actually paved with white jade and diamond. However, the people in long robes seemed to ignore them. Strange gear creations lived in this city, as if they were living creatures. Humans were not the only masters here. Looking at this strange yet familiar world, Catalina was lost. She was just a small bar girl born in the countryside. The most important person she had ever seen was the mayor of a neighboring town. This scene was far beyond her understanding. Time passed. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. In that instant, Catalina felt like she had experienced a long time. The buildings in this modern city also became a bit older. There were even more strange things appearing. But suddenly, one day, the color of the sky changed. The white clouds were ignited by flames and began to boil in a strange manner. Soon, the burning clouds in the sky seemed to be boiling. Blood-red ripples appeared everywhere. This strange change caused the pedestrians on the streets to panic. The next moment, the clouds were parted. Countless rays of light shone down. It was as if something was spying on this world. At #yen at #yen. Hashtag at @1321. Strange cries and screams sounded on the street. Even though Catalina was there, no one was able to discover her. Even though it was an unfamiliar language, Catalina could instinctively understand the meaning behind it. Angel, the angel is here. Doomsday. We're finished. The prophecy was actually true. That's right, the clouds were parted, and the angels with white feathers descended. They were as strong, beautiful, and powerful as the legends said. Their golden armor glowed like the sun, and their long swords glowed with flames. However, unlike what the priests said, these angels didn't come with good intentions or blessings. The people's first attempts to reach out for help were directly cut off by their sword. These beautiful angels were only here to carry out the butcher's mission. In Catalina's eyes, these beautiful creations were expressionlessly waving the sharp swords in their hands, cutting down the local citizens. Some citizens tried to control the construction puppet guards to fight against them, but before they could fight, they were nailed to the ground by the blazing spears. Something even scarier happened next. The entire cloud layer disappeared without a trace. In the sky, a towering giant stood up. This giant had 2 heads and 4 arms. One head had a smiling face, while the other head had a snake head. However, his smile didn't mean that he was forgiving. He commanded the angels to carry out a massacre while tearing down the pride of civilization, the sky garden that led to the endless void, and tossing it down like deadly meteors. Yet, this was only the beginning. Various gods of all shapes and sizes walked out from high up in the divine realm. They either sent out their clones or personally transformed themselves into deadly destroyers. The great majority of gods weren't purely humanoid. Twisted bestial limbs seemed to be a common trait among all of them. This instinctive bestial behavior evolved the massacre into an even more brutal hunting in the forest. For Catalina, this was a scene of despair. Death and despair were everywhere. She faintly sensed that something was wrong, but she didn't know what was wrong. Explosions and pitiful screams filled her ears, and all she could see were cold slaughterers, as well as scenes that resembled a slaughterhouse. She wanted to close her eyes, but discovered that she was unable to close them. It was as if there was some sort of power that was making her record every scene. No, no, no. The despairing girl sat on the ground and cried. The world and scenery around her kept changing. The only things that didn't change were the pitiful screams of despair and curses towards the gods. No, as the angels and gods efficiently slaughtered, the cries and pitiful screams of death didn't last for very long before coming to an end. However, the sounds of explosions never stopped. These slaughterers didn't intend to leave any souvenirs for this city. Catalina was rather lost as she stood in the middle of the ruins. Nobody could see her. She felt like she shouldn't be here, but she instinctively felt like she belonged here. She wandered confusedly through the rubble. Her reason and instincts were both urging her to search for something. Suddenly, she saw a pitch-black stone tablet. It was just lying there, untouched by anyone. However, a mysterious sense of delight welled up in her heart. Catalina knew that she had found her goal. She had found hope for the future. But before she could touch the stone tablet, the two-headed god in the sky suddenly trembled and looked at her. She had been discovered. The next instant, the angel's spears and the god's light of divine punishment arrived together. There was only light before her, but everything returned to silence. Wait a moment, just a little bit more. Catalina, are you all right? The violent shaking awakened her from her daze. When she regained her senses, she discovered that she was still in a small room in a bar. Her adopted father was looking at her with a nervous expression. Meanwhile, I also heaved a sigh of relief when I saw that Catalina had woken up. What's the result? My guess was correct. Catalina is indeed incredibly important, no matter if it's to us or to the ancient remnant that might still exist. She's the key to the Sky Tower. They're definitely looking for her. It's highly likely that the undead are all here for her. Timlad nimbly removed the electrodes from Catalina's ears and forehead and recorded the data on the device. Even though I had obtained astonishing information, Timlad didn't seem happy at all. Instead, he had a heavy expression. How long will it take? I'm not sure. It depends. My seemingly vague question didn't receive a definite answer. But since Timlad didn't deny my guess, it was highly likely that it was true. This time, things were truly going to get interesting. Currently, old Barton was still viciously glaring at me. It was as if Catalina wouldn't suffer if I didn't suggest doing a little soul memory retrieval experiment. Barton, your daughter is far more important than you think. Running away isn't a solution. However, I wasn't the one who said this. The Dragon Lich Winlair was usually quite amusing, but as a Lich, how could he not understand the importance of souls? Catalina's soul was so special, and he had long since noticed how important Catalina was. As Barton's blood-related elder, he was able to distinguish right from wrong and speak up for me, which was also helping me out. Catalina turned around and looked at me pitifully. Her eyes were watery, and the tears that had just flowed out of her eyes in her sleep were about to burst out again. It seemed that if I forced her to look at these things again, she would cry for me. I shook my head, telling her not to worry. I had no intentions of forcing Catalina to forcefully retrieve her soul memories. Souls were so fragile and delicate. Forcefully extracting information from them would be the equivalent of using a road roller to crush a walnut. Perhaps the road roller would be able to pick up some bits of the walnut kernel from the ground, but the walnut would definitely be finished. Even if it was only for the sake of completing the treasure trove, I would have to take my time in retrieving the treasure within the walnut. As I watched Catalina sob in her adopted father's arms, I knew that this was all I could do for today. Plus, I also heard the explosive news about the reinforcements. It would seem that I would have to properly think about how to deal with them. I'm tired from today. Let's all go home and rest early. Too much attention would actually make it difficult for me to do anything. I didn't choose to stay in the bungalow that Salima had provided me. Instead, I directly found a room in a bar here. At this moment, even though it was already late at night, the neighboring room was still constantly rumbling. Even the floorboards were trembling to the rhythm. Quiet down. Are you trying to let me sleep? I suddenly kicked the wall, and the neighboring room instantly quieted down. However, several minutes later, an even more peculiar buzzing sound caused my scalp to go numb. Honestly, I felt rather helpless. It would seem that having Timlad stay next to me had been a foolish idea. So many things had happened today, and so much new data had appeared for him to research. With his personality, it would be strange if he obediently went to sleep. TSK, perhaps he modified himself so that he doesn't need to sleep anymore. Considering that the undead might come again tomorrow, I really did need his research result. In the end, I could only give up on trying to stop Timlad. I took out 2 earplugs from my luggage and stuffed them into my ears. The reason why I didn't sleep wasn't just because of the noise next door. It was because the battle hammer in my room was glowing faintly with a silver light that made me feel quite safe. I touched the battle hammer and once again tried to use its power to dispel the curse on my body. But soon, the power of holy light surrounded my body, transforming me into a blinding light bulb. Yet, it was still unable to dispel the curse that made me weak. It would seem that this isn't a curse. The holy light isn't even hostile towards me. The holy light feels that I'm in an excellent condition. Could this be some sort of blessing? This strange situation gave me an even stranger conclusion. But when considering Amelia's expertise in life magic and plant magic, it was possible for her to turn a curse into a blessing, or to turn a blessing's effect into one that made me weak. This was just like how a recently severed limb could still be reattached. A severed limb from 10 years ago would already be a part of your current condition. Neither holy light nor healing magic would be able to heal it. It would seem that whoever started the trouble should untie it. Just as I was sighing, I suddenly heard the residents downstairs angrily curse. "What are you doing upstairs? Why are you so noisy? Are you even going to let me sleep? Do you even have any sense of civility?" I shook my head helplessly as I stood up again. It seemed that I would need to remind Timlad. Also that idiot next door. "You're so bored that you're lighting a fire in your room. Don't you have any common sense? Aren't you afraid of burning your room down?" And so, I stopped and silently summoned a low-level soul. Perhaps this little soul would give the noisy Timlad a bad, sweet dream. It would let him know that howling in the middle of the night wasn't a good habit. If he was really dissatisfied, he should pay attention to how he expressed his dissatisfaction. Forget it. Let's sleep early. When I turned around, I noticed that something was wrong with the silly cat. She had transformed into her elven form for once, but only revealed her cat ears and tail. She was rolling around on the bed while pulling at the blanket. "Meow, master, the bed's been warmed up. It's so soft and warm. Come sleep." Her sweet words caused goosebumps to rise all over my body. I was just about to ask her which pill she had taken, when I noticed that the memory crystal on the table next to her was glowing brightly. I instantly understood. But this time, it wasn't just goosebumps. I instinctively felt that the death omen was already circling around my head. What the hell? You're recording something? You intend to show those 2 crazy girls? Are you intending to kill me? Meow, I don't understand. I'm just warming up Master's bed like usual. Harloise intentionally revealed her snow-white skin and the curves of her thighs. Although she was indeed quite pleasing to the eye, this definitely wasn't the time to be staring at her like an idiot. Hurry and stop. I'm really going to die. Meow, Master doesn't like being warmed up by me? But, didn't you say that you really liked being served by me in the tailor's fitting room that day? What the hell? You're still holding a grudge against me? Lady Harloise, please spare me. Do you think that I haven't had enough fun? Meow, I don't know. I'm just a pet cat that warms up Master's bed. Chapter 5:17. Will they come? Or won't they come? No matter what the ending is, it's still hard to look forward to. You're still hesitating? What's the point of thinking so much? Just act like a man and accept your fate. Accept what? Accept the end of blood or a good chopper. If they come, it'll be fun for me. But if they don't come, the undead will be even more difficult to deal with. No matter which option I choose, it'll be a bad ending. Is there really no good ending? Actually, you should think in a different way. If they come, you'll have reinforcements. If they don't come, you'll survive. Doesn't that mean you'll win no matter who wins? This AQ's spirit is truly amazing. Just return that memory crystal to me, and I promise that everything will be fine. The sky was just beginning to brighten. I randomly found a restaurant and ordered some breakfast. I sat by the window, and the silly cat started giving me trouble even before the food was delivered. However, I didn't have the time or energy to chat with her. After all, we were still in the middle of a damned war. Some people said that if you wanted to know a city's economic and political situation, you only needed to look at the streets and the number of people on the streets during breakfast time. Morning was a critical time when a city would start to get busy. The number of people on the streets would directly represent how prosperous the city was. The shops and residences on the streets would also be the showcase of the city's economy. I deeply believed this to be true. Starwood City was only a small city. In the past, the busy people on the streets were mostly local farmers and merchants. But today, most of the shops and residences had already closed their doors and windows. The passers-by who were hurriedly running on the streets were usually fully armed. They were either adventurers who had been temporarily recruited or professional local warriors. The adventurers who came here for the treasures were indirectly doing a good deed. At the very least, Starwood City, which was already lacking in combat strength, was now providing high-quality combat strength and resources. Not bad. Judging from the current situation, no matter if they were ordinary citizens or professional warriors, they seemed to be in good spirits. Perhaps yesterday's victory had encouraged them, or perhaps the scene of the undead vanguard being wiped out had given them courage, or perhaps it was simply because the undead's main army hadn't arrived yet. At the very least, their morale was quite high. In fact, some young novice soldiers even had hopeful expressions as if they were looking forward to the glory of victory. Looking forward to war? Young people are so naive and adorable. To have such a pure desire for the glory of war, to be able to desire glory and victory before stepping onto the battlefield, instead of praying to the heavens to survive, isn't that the privilege of rookies? Personally, I still hope that he can maintain this state tomorrow. At least it's more pleasing to the eye than cowering in the trenches. I don't think so. Those who rush into the battlefield excitedly like this are the easiest to become cannon fodder in the first round of battle. You never know what they will do when they are too excited. The most troublesome ones were rookies who would suddenly go crazy and think that they could defeat 1,000 men. They always think that they are the protagonists of the legendary story, but they don't know that the so-called protagonists and heroes are just the lucky ones who survived among the countless dead. 99% of the rookies are just minor characters who will die within 3 months. How about we make a bet? Bet on whether he's dead or alive. If you can't afford to bet, will you bet on him to live? Betting on how many days he can live seems a little too cruel. The freckle-faced, flaxen-haired young man didn't know that while he was seriously patrolling the streets, there were 2 unscrupulous seniors who didn't believe in his future. But this couldn't be blamed on us for being too bored. When you fought on too many battlefields and saw too many of your comrades suddenly die, it was inevitable that you would become a little crazy. Comrades? Only those who survive 3 battles are my comrades. Before you prove that you're valuable enough for me to remember your name, I don't need to know your name. Emperor Olin had said such a classical saying back when he was still a sergeant major. Although it was cruel, many people acknowledged it. Is it about time? The silly cat's question came out of nowhere, but I nodded. The time had long since come. It was just that I had been dragging it out. It seemed that it was finally time for me to break through. I lightly tapped my fingers on the table, making a series of crisp, dong-dong-dong sounds. My heartbeat also beat along with this rhythm. My vision suddenly changed as the air suddenly slowed down. Everything in front of me slowed down. Everyone's mouths were agape, but no sound could be heard. Even the water droplets in the air could be seen clearly. I felt a mysterious sense of control, as if I was in control of the entire world. In my vision, the entire restaurant seemed to have stopped moving. What made me dissatisfied was that I sensed that our breakfast was about to be ruined. Not far away, a waiter with a hand full of food obviously didn't notice that he was about to step on the tail of a dog that had snuck into the restaurant. In his right hand was the beef stew that we had ordered, and in his left hand was the silly cat's grilled fish. As for the freckle-faced novice at the entrance, a thief adventurer was stealing his money. Perhaps he was worrying about dying in battle rather than worrying about dying in battle. Honestly, at such an important time, and so, as I complained, I casually tossed out a copper coin. At this moment, everything returned to normal, but everything had already been arranged. That coin just happened to land under the waiter's foot. He suddenly slipped and almost fell, but he immediately stood up and avoided the hungry dog that was hiding under the table. Right after that, the coin flew in a perfect arc and smashed right into the novice's head. In that case, no matter how slow he was, he would realize that his wallet had been stolen and know how to deal with it. Clang. Everything was just as I expected. The small copper coin was of great use. The waiter managed to avoid the dog, and I smiled in satisfaction as I watched the novice angrily chase after the thief. So this is Saint Rank? That's right, the timing that Harlois was asking about was the timing for me to break through to Saint Rank. Perhaps this would be an almost impossible breakthrough for others, but for me, who had so many accumulations, it was only a matter of time. A small accident had caused this breakthrough to not be so perfect. Yep, this is Saint Rank. Their control over the world and control over their own existence is the foundational difference between Saint Rank and Legend Rank. Hee. The silly cat on the table licked her milk as she looked at me with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. Laugh all you want. It's so hard to endure. I was now full of anger as I took the roasted fish off my head while wiping my face with a steely expression. Don't you know just how, so this is Saint Rank? You had such a serious expression on your face when the roasted fish flew over and smashed into your face, and you even brought it on yourself. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The silly cat was right. While my silver coin saved my beef stew, it also caused the waiter to toss out the roasted fish in his other hand. However, out of so many people here, it just happened to hit me. It seemed that I really would have to go to the goddess of misfortune's church to change my luck. Wait a moment, why was it the roasted fish that flew out? You did it on purpose. You saved your beef stew, but you made him toss out my breakfast roasted fish. Let's not look into the details. That was just an accident. Alright then, the nostalgic cat hat appeared on my head again. I needed to think about what delicacies I should order to make this silly cat let go of me. Meow, a salt-roasted fish-flavored head. It tastes pretty good. Silly cat, if you don't come down now, I'm going to go find Beifong. Tui, do you think I'm afraid of you? I can become human now. After the chaos, I finally had the free time to organize my gains from breaking through. I had been preparing for my breakthrough for a very long time now. Actually, I had already accumulated enough power. But if I was using the highest level as the standard, then accumulating more power at the lowest level might not be a bad thing. I had originally intended to grind a bit more, but now that the undead army was about to arrive, it would be more practical to have more power. And so, I prepared to break through. When other main characters break through, they'll either counterattack at a critical moment, or they'll shine brightly and act like a charlatan. That way, they'll be able to act cool and have a bunch of volunteer commentators jump out to explain the situation. Why is it that when it's my turn, it's different? Weren't you acting cool? You're actually quite creative. Really, if only the roasted fish didn't land on your head in the end. Ha 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 ha. The silly cat, who was intentionally pretending to be friendly, couldn't help but laugh and roll around on the table. And so, I unhesitatingly picked up the silly cat and tossed her at a stray dog that was searching for food under the table. Go, Tomcat who broke through the sky. Chapter 518. The Saint Rank was the symbol of transcending the mortal realm. Since it was called Saint, it was probably a realm that all living beings in the mortal plane yearned for, but were unable to reach. Iron bloodline, bronze body, silver dignity, gold will, legend rank, world saint rank, undying myth rank, and undying semi-god rank. This was a rough evaluation of everyone's power level in the mortal plane. It was also a way of dividing a person's potential. Since humans, the most numerous species in the mortal plane, were far too weak, this method of dividing power levels was far too detailed at the lower levels, but far too crude at the higher levels. As the elemental tide furiously increased in the mortal plane, individuals' power levels greatly increased, making this evaluation system seem far too outdated even for humans. It was said that the fairies were already in the process of creating a new evaluation system. It was said that the epic stage had been split into 3 stages based on the 3 most difficult thresholds in the past. However, for the mortal saint stage, it was simply divided into true saints and quasi-saints. The difference was whether or not one could create one's own domain world. That's right, this was only a personal domain world, not a soul world. Even in the past, when powerful individuals were incredibly powerful, soul worlds were incredibly rare among saint rank individuals. The legend rank was the path of creating one's self. The next step, the saint rank, was the complete condensation of one's self, which would allow one to interfere with the surroundings. The powerful self would even be capable of projecting a world. The saints' control over their surroundings and themselves was incomparable to that of legends. While the total amount of their mana and air might not increase by much, their more detailed control would allow them to do 3/10 of what they did. More importantly, they would begin to touch the existence of rules, and begin to do things that go against the laws of physics and magical principles. The representatives of this were the best of the saints, who could even use their willpower to rewrite the world. Currently, the so-called true saint's personal domain world was nothing more than a soul world that had shrunk in size. True saints would be able to barely change the elemental ratio in a certain area and increase the power of their skilled spells and technique. Using one's willpower to directly rewrite the world and using one's willpower to control the elements to change the environment would be like the difference between heaven and earth. The difference in difficulty would naturally result in a tremendous difference in power. It would seem that even though the requirements for leveling up had become much lower, the basic principle of one's effort being equal to one's reward hadn't changed. As for whether or not newly ascended saints didn't have a soul world, I felt that the answer was no. There would always be some people capable of using chalk to draw a myth masterpiece, but the vast majority of new saints would likely never be able to obtain a soul world. So, it's normal that I don't have a soul world. That's right, my soul world had now become a bug-like area of the Hades. Even though I was now a saint, there wouldn't be much of a change in my mana reserves. But don't tell me you don't have a soul world either. If I really couldn't improve my soul world by much, there would be no need for me to forcefully improve my soul world before the final battle. It would be impossible for me to obtain another soul world, but my magical pet could. Harloise had once been a peak myth-ranked undead. Although I had never seen her soul world before, with how powerful her will was, and how deep her hatred was, and how much she had accumulated, it would be inconceivable if she didn't have a soul world. A magical pet's soul strength couldn't surpass its master's, and its power level couldn't be higher than its master's. This kind of ironclad contract limited the pet's abilities. Now that I had reached saint rank again, it was only natural that she would also reach saint rank. Yes, it can be used, but it can only be summoned once in this battle. I was delighted to hear this. After all, a soul world was a person's ideal world and deepest desire. There were quite a few non-combat soul worlds. Harlowe's soul world had never been leaked to anyone before, so I had thought that it would be something like that as well. But before I could ask any more questions, I suddenly heard a commotion outside. Undead, the undead are here. The undead army arrived earlier than expected. They arrived at noon on the second day. However, the first to arrive were still a new batch of flying undead. They circled in the sky like vultures mercilessly stalking humans in the desert. They were waiting to feast on your rotten flesh, but they had no intention of directly attacking. As for the undead's ground troops, considering the losses from the landslide, I could only wait for a while longer. Death-winged demons, shadows, bone dragons, flying undead, undead air knight, gargoyles, and so on. There are so many of them. It would seem that conservation has brought all of her forces with her. The undead in the sky were like a world's fair, and their power level was unquestionable. There were rank 2 and 3 gargoyles, all the way up to rank 5 legend rank bone dragons. There were also quite a few powerful undead lords and undead lords. In fact, I even saw a blasphemous blind man. This blasphemous blind man was an undead monster that possessed its own domain of despair. It looked just like a brain with a single eye, but its tentacles had over 100 eyes that were glowing black. This blasphemous blind man had evolved from the semi-god corpse of an almost extinct species in the mortal plane. It was said that each eye could cast a spell on its own. Perhaps the spell they cast wouldn't be powerful enough, but just one beholder would be more than enough to take on an entire mage squad. It was also said that the gigantic eye in the brain also had powerful abilities such as truth vision, curses, death rays, and so on. This beholder demon was basically a super cannon. TSK, there are even divine mummies? They're all ancient artifacts from that generation. In the mortal plane, such a person would definitely be famous, and it would be easy for him to be at the bottom of the calamity rankings. But here, he seemed to be nothing more than an ordinary member of the undead's aerial forces. As an undead leader that had monopolized an entire undead plane for thousands of years, when the entire undead plane was mobilized, and when sufficient temptations and bargaining chips were brought out, his combat potential would be astonishing. I'll share this world with you. The living there have delicious souls and raw meat. There's no chaotic and despairing magnetic ice storms there. There's nothing but pigs waiting to die for the heavens. Come, pass through this dimensional door and enjoy fresh flesh and souls. In the snow-white domain of despair, that familiar illusory figure stated her wish. Even though she was expressionless as if she was just reciting lines, the undead that filled the sky were already impatiently rushing into the gigantic skeletal door. Although some of them were subordinates under the undead emperor's control, most of them were wild undead from the undead plains. Many of them were even undead lords who had monopolized entire mountains. In order to pass through the dimensional door, these undead would need to respond to a summoning contract. Naturally, they would become conservation's cannon fodder. A black jade gargoyle was shot down from the sky by Timlad's modified cannon. I immediately dismembered the gargoyle's soul and broadcasted this memory on the city walls, so that the living wouldn't be so lucky to survive. It was quite obvious that the seed of holy light that had exceeded expectations had achieved an unexpected result. Conservation's regular combat strength was now somewhat lacking, which was why she wanted to recruit some random undead to help her. It's also possible that she treasures the power she has, so she summons some undead to serve as cannon fodder. After all, she doesn't know that you're no longer capable of using that divine art. All she needs to do is make some verbal promises, and she'll be able to use others as meat shields and cannon fodder. Can't you think on the bright side? I'm just worried that you'll underestimate your enemy and end up falling into a trap. Relax. You know how lucky I am. I've always directly considered the unluckiest possible outcome. Luck isn't something I can enjoy. As I chatted idly, I also asked Harloise if there was any way to defeat the undead. However, the answer was that she naturally denied it. The rapid arrival of the new undead aerial force naturally caused the living to be on high alert. However, their strange appearance also became a type of disguise. Only a small number of experts knew that the undead didn't have much meaning based on their appearance. Liches didn't look much different from skeleton soldiers, and elite hate beasts were nothing more than a pile of ugly corpse chunks. Only the mass-produced new undead would appear uniform. And these seemingly random undead were far more difficult to deal with than the previously uniform gargoyles and bone dragons. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that the undead seemed to be worried about something. At the very least, they didn't automatically attack. I understood the undead lords. I had had enough of them in the Yongya army. Most undead lords were formed from negative emotions. Bloodlust was their nature, and rebellion was their instinct. The only reason why these undead lords didn't act upon seeing fresh flesh and souls was because of conservation's pressure. Since they're not attacking because they're on guard, and we also need time, let's make them even more on guard. Snap. I immediately acted upon this thought. With a snap of my fingers, the floating fortress of Yongya City appeared once again. This time, it just happened to be right above Starwood City. Although Yongya City currently only had enough energy to float, the undead didn't know that the moment this floating fortress appeared, all the undead aerial knights immediately scattered and flew back several kilometers. It was evident that their master had ordered them to temporarily retreat. I heaved a sigh of relief when I saw this. I was actually the most worried about the undead aerial knights constantly harassing us. That would mean that we would suffer many casualties before the final battle. See, this is the eternal Naxxrama Zex. I keep feeling like you're subtly trying to die again. Is this a mistake? Cough, cough, I'm just stalling for time. What I needed to stall for time wasn't just for the sake of reinforcements. At this moment, above the clouds, a small adventuring team of nearly 30 people was riding on the back of a gigantic dragon Lich. Their target was the ruins on the map. Judging from their physical appearance and equipment, they were all powerful warriors. However, there was an ordinary-looking girl riding on the dragon's head. Judging from where everyone was, she was the person everyone was protecting. Even though the dragon Lich was also an undead, and even though undead magic was used to conceal the aura of the living, the dragon Lich still carefully avoided all the undead aerial knights. However, the constant rise and fall of the dragon Lich made the adventuring team quite uncomfortable. A certain legend-ranked mercenary had lost his mind to the point that he wouldn't let go of the dragon's head no matter what. A certain dark elf was vomiting all over the ground, and a certain human female mercenary was screaming incessantly. Only a bald old man was standing on the dragon's head, looking forward with greater and greater ease. His boiling blood seemed to be foretelling his future fate. Surprisingly, however, Katerina was quite clear-headed. She did her best to adapt to the rising and falling of the dragon's back with her adopted father's help. However, her eyes were filled with illusions of the past. Katerina, who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken, was the key to this trip. Chapter 519. A black floating city suddenly appeared in the sky above Starwood City. Not only did this frighten the undead, even the ordinary people on our side were even more terrified. After all, compared to the spiraling undead, the floating city was right above their heads. That pitch-black magical barrier gave off an abnormal sense of evil and insecurity. And if the floating city descended any further, Starwood City wouldn't even exist anymore. In order to avoid any misunderstandings, I generously allowed everyone to enter this floating city. Unfortunately, very few people actually dared to enter. Still, there was a city above and below Starwood City, which could provide cover for each other's firepower and combat strength. This was indeed a highly cost-effective defensive formation. All targets have been locked on. All coordinates have been reset. Forbidden spell, lost crossroads. Nobody expected that the first to attack would be the defending humans. As Harloise finished her long incantation, a tremendous amount of mana was buffed by the mage tower and transformed into a real attack. Since the undead were retreating, we should conserve mana? Too young, too boring. Ahem, my elders had said it well. Don't try to make a big fuss out of nothing. You should be practical. If we really missed this opportunity to ambush the undead, that would truly expose the fact that we didn't have enough mana. If you actively exposed your weakness, then it would truly be time for the undead to attack. Of course, we indeed didn't have much mana left. That was why I unhesitatingly asked Harloise to use up all her mana and cast her most dangerous spell. Another foundational difference between Saint rank mages was that they could cast forbidden spells. Of course, the power and effect of a forbidden spell would depend on the caster. Black magical rings appeared in the chosen location. These abnormal black rings intersected with each other and started spinning on their own, as if they were black balls that were absorbing light. They spun faster and faster, and soon 16 self-spinning black balls appeared in the sky. What's the point of this? Harloi's abnormal spell caused the undead to retreat even more vigorously. Everyone knew that the mage tower wouldn't waste mana for nothing. However, their retreat had been within Harloi's calculations from the very start. When considering Harloi's tremendous magical knowledge, a forbidden spell that she cast at the saint rank would definitely be the most dangerous forbidden spell of the same rank. The black ball of light grew larger and larger, and a strange fluctuation spread through the air. Then, the flying bone dragons and gargoyles flapped their wings with all their might in an attempt to escape from the black ball, but in the end they flew directly toward the black ball. The flying undead panicked and tried to fly up, but suddenly fell to the ground like a meteor. The magic wings that were flapping with all their might actually accelerated the process of their descent. Boom! An unlucky gargoyle was directly shattered into pieces. A bone dragon happened to crash into an underground tower. Before it could figure out which direction it was heading in, the mercenaries and the city defense cannons, which it had long since ignored, ignited it. The sky was a complete mess. Most of the flying undead were flying upside down, and soon, their flying directions became irregular. They could fly horizontally, diagonally, or even upside down. Apart from flying straight, anything was possible. Let me take back what I said just now. There was a fellow that was flying straight, and it seemed to have found a way to deal with the situation. A horrifying smile appeared on its face, and it flew straight towards the ground with a joyful expression. Boom! The undead in the sky were just like a bunch of headless flies. It was impossible to predict their abnormal flying path. But, even if the undead didn't die when they directly crashed into the ground, it was likely that they wouldn't be able to fly again. In fact, even those powerful undead lords were colliding with each other and falling from the sky. I even saw it. I could now tell that the small ball in the sky had no attack power at all. However, it was capable of changing the direction of gravity around it. No, it wasn't as simple as that. High-level undead wouldn't be so easy to deal with. This was most likely a compound forbidden spell. Perhaps it was also a psychological suggestion that would cause the undead's sense of direction and balance to become unbalanced. 59 points. The most important part is that you'll fail the test. This is a triple forbidden spell that also has illusions. In their eyes, the world is still normal. But in a chaotic environment, believing that everything is normal is the most fatal. Harloise had an exhausted expression as she walked down the spellcaster platform. As she walked, she transformed back into her cat form. She jumped onto my shoulder and yawned as she began to doze off. No matter if it was from our soul connection or from her physical appearance, I could tell that she was extremely weak. It would seem that this spell had indeed drained her dry. I suddenly understood. This spell affected flying undead in all three aspects: vision, body sense, and gravity. The undead's outstanding resistance actually made the magic's effects even more difficult to predict. This was a forbidden spell that would be more difficult to deal with the more conscious the undead was. Doing nothing and waiting for the magic's effects to pass would actually be the safest. The more you tried to save yourself, the easier it would be for problems to occur. Vision was an illusory spell, body sense was a type of mental magic, and gravity magic was a type of magic that wasn't popular to begin with. At the very least, very few people knew that gravity magic was an extension of the incredibly difficult spatial magic. Basically, to cast this spell, you need to simultaneously reach the saint rank in terms of illusion, mental magic, and space magic. This might be even more difficult than becoming a semi-god. It must have been hard on you to cast such a spell when you're only at the saint rank. I felt mysteriously displeased when I sensed how weak the silly cat was. I wouldn't feel any heartache or guilt. I was just displeased. That was why I also walked onto the spellcaster platform and began to focus on casting. You can't find the direction? Fine, I'll point you in the right direction. Listen to my command, Eternal Ice River. When the main battle reaches a stalemate and the living's walls are being destroyed one by one, and the undead are preparing to begin their massacre, a young hero leads an adventuring team into the enemy's camp, ambushing and killing the undead's undead emperor, saving the world in the end. This is basically an epic storyline. Still, it sounds rather familiar. Of course, wasn't this the same ending during the Yongya calamity from over 100 years ago? Could it be that we're the heroes this time? Although the mercenaries' boorish voices were being suppressed, they were unable to suppress the excitement in their hearts. Mercenaries fought for the sake of wealth and fame, and what could be more profitable than being a legendary hero? As long as they could obtain fame, the benefits would naturally follow. You still don't know that Emperor Yongya from back then is right behind you. He was the one who came up with this ambush plan. Barton, the leader of the adventuring team, inwardly commented. However, he had an expression of anger on his face. He suddenly glared at the adventuring team members, causing them to shut up. Currently, they were in the forest outside the ruins. Even though the undead sentinels didn't intend to patrol the forest, it would be foolish to make noise and attract trouble. That's right, Barton knew about Roland's identity. Roland, who greatly valued Barton's future, not only told Barton the truth, he even mentioned his future plans and gave Barton an invitation that far surpassed Barton's current abilities. The commander of the Dawn Project and the Dawn Army? That's quite a generous offer. Originally, even though Barton was facing a legendary hero, he still didn't take this invitation to heart. This wasn't because he looked down on Roland. It was because he still believed that the world's major events had nothing to do with a commoner like him. However, he didn't expect that sometimes fate wouldn't give you the chance to refuse such an important task. Barton didn't even mention that his adopted daughter was an android. According to Roland, it was a scheme of some powerful existence that had been able to take Carwins away from the ruins back then. This meant that Barton had been involved in all this trouble from the very start. Barton couldn't help but recall what Roland had said before he left as he looked at his adopted daughter, who had just woken up from a deep sleep and had a fatigued expression. With danger looming over us, you can leave since it has nothing to do with you. However, your daughter Katerina will be hunted down by the undead emperors and that ghost hiding in the ruins no matter where she goes. That's because she's the true inheritor of that civilization's ruins. Barton's blood was boiling in his veins. He was no idiot, nor was he a coward. As someone who loved his daughter dearly, this bald man had the courage to challenge the gods for his daughter's sake. And now, he knew that in order to protect his daughter, who was destined to be extraordinary, he would have to give up on this commoner mentality of muddling through life. Perhaps no matter what the result of this incident is, I'll have to consider his invitation. I'll have to protect Carwins against all sorts of threats. Barton glared at the young mercenaries who were trying to curry favor with Catalina. No matter where this threat comes from, I need power. Chapter 520. The abundant mana was converted into icekin as Roland spoke in a simple manner. The grayish-white mana was infused into the clouds in the sky. All around Sky City, numerous ice spirits danced and sang loudly. These ice spirits were one-winged fairies who appeared to be only 13 or 14 years old. However, they were only the size of an arm. These ice spirits weren't creatures from the elemental planes. They were the byproducts of deadly elemental forbidden spells. It was said that the more the elemental elements doted on a mage, the easier it would be for them to summon such ice spirits. And when these snow-white ice spirits danced in the sky, from a certain standpoint, This place became the elemental plane that belonged to them. I once crossed countless ice plains and witnessed the strength of life and the greatness of nature. I was also once intoxicated by the beauty of the glaciers. However, true beauty can only be seen in the frozen sea beneath the glaciers. This wasn't some mysterious incantation. It was simply a written description of what I had seen in the past. However, there were more than 100 ice spirits, which would normally only appear in 1 or 2 semi-god mages' forbidden spells. They danced around the city of Yongya. Their snow-white crystalline powder formed paths of snow in the sky. They seemed to really enjoy listening to this description of natural ice. In the north of the Northlands, I passed through the eternal sea of ice as the undead. However, I still struggled to survive in an extremely cold cave. That deadly northerly wind was capable of freezing my soul. Fortunately, I witnessed a beautiful aurora before I passed out. On a snow-white plain, the sky opened up a window of color. That was a beautiful scene that I'll never be able to imagine for the rest of my life. A regular mage's incantation would either be a requirement for a certain ritual, or a simple psychological suggestion that would allow one to enter a state that was more in line with the nature of the ice element. And for me, there was nothing more suitable than the memories of the ice elemental plane. The foundational difference between saint-rank mages and ordinary mages was that saint-rank mages could directly use their thoughts to interfere with the world. While I was recalling and describing the extreme northern winter that was forbidden to all life, all the ice spirits voluntarily came over to listen to me. As I described and recalled the past, the sky around me was dyed the color of ice. "You're actually using ice magic against the undead? How foolish are you?" A white specter dragon proudly looked down on the ice elementals. While the undead were fleeing in panic, its calmness was rather eye-catching. However, as an undead lord that had no concept of body temperature to begin with, as well as a former white dragon species that still had quite a bit of ice resistance, it indeed had a reason to look down on ordinary ice magic. However, the Winter Demon Lord suddenly saw something inconceivable. Amidst all the chaos, a Winter Demon Lord was actually running as if it was running for its life. This Winter Demon Lord was a super zombie that had evolved from the frozen dead. It was a top-tier ice element undead, and it possessed a fatal ice domain to begin with. Not only that, Undead Emperor Conservation had chosen this Winter Demon Lord as her personal guard. How could it possibly be afraid of ice magic? But in the next instant, it realized that its astonishment was meaningless. It also understood why the Winter Ghost Lord would run for its life. The Ice Elves chuckled as they approached the Ghost Dragon and passed through its body. Only their bell-like giggles could be heard in the air. The Ghost Dragon's soulfire was frozen as it was yesterday. All that fell to the ground were shattered ice shards. Ice domain? No, the elemental world. Unfortunately, the ice elemental dragon wasn't even able to scream in pain when its consciousness returned to its body. The ice elemental dragon's simple explanation of ice magic actually summoned a tremendous number of ice elementals. Their existence further intensified the ice elemental world. Everyone knew that there were no ice elemental planes in this world. In fact, even ice elemental creatures were incredibly rare species. They didn't have their own homes, and ice elemental creatures such as frigid maw would usually be frozen in dangerous places like snowy mountains, the Arctic lands, and glaciers. But after the ice Hades were established, some things underwent a foundational change. Among the 4 elements of the ice Hades, there was the concept of the ice elemental plane. Not only that, the ice elemental plane controlled the foundational dimensional laws that represented life. Basically, according to Hei's dimensional laws that corresponded to the 4 major elemental planes, the ice elemental plane would become a subplane of the ice Hades. But due to the difference in the dimensional laws of creation, Goddess Heichi used the 4 existing elemental planes to create the Heichi world. Meanwhile, I first created the 4 elemental pillars, and then used them as a fulcrum to create the Ice Hades world. If it really was possible for an ice elemental plane to exist, then it would definitely be inextricably linked to the pillars of ice. Obviously, if the 4 elemental pillars were able to create an independent elemental plane, the world of the Hades world would become even more powerful. If one day the 4 Hades pillars left the Hades world and became the elemental gods of an independent elemental plane, then the Hades world would be as stable as the He world. At that time, the 4 Hades pillars would no longer be the Hades world's weakness. The Hades world would be able to exist together with the He world for eternity. And even if I didn't consider the long term, controlling a newly born elemental plane would mean endless power and resources. This was something that would be incredibly profitable. And so, as the representative of the Hades faction on the surface, I went to the Great Snow Mountain not long after I revived. That's right, the Great Snow Mountain that had long since become half an elemental plane. This was the place where countless ice and snow creatures such as Frigid Maw lived, the holy land of winter where dozens of semi-god and above elemental creatures live. Do you want to have your own elemental plane? If not, I'll go to the far north and find the cold light beasts. Fine, I understand how urgent you all are. Retract that annoying chill, I'm still alive. Holy light, law, death, and ice. I still didn't have a way out of the first 2 elemental planes. I intended to rob an undead emperor of the death plane, but that wouldn't be something that could be done in a short period of time. However, I had the manpower and resources to construct the ice elemental plane. With the Great Snow Mountain as the foundation, all I had to do was carry out the Ice Ruler's authorization and bury a portion of the Pillar of Ice in the Great Snow Mountain. This made the division of the elemental plane much easier. It was also worth mentioning that thanks to the mastermind behind the scenes of a certain creator goddess of ice, who had long since disappeared, it was much easier to divide the Great Snow Mountain from He. With the assistance of another creator goddess of ice, it was the same as obtaining the full authorization of the creator goddess of ice. The division of the ice elemental plane went quite smoothly. Not only that, other ice elemental creatures and ice magical creatures from the coldest lands joined in, further speeding up the division of the ice elemental plane. The current Great Snow Mountain was now a half-elemental plane that was separated from the mortal plane. It could be called the Great Snow Mountain Magical Realm. As the creator of the ice elemental plane, since the true ruler of ice was unable to leave the Hades, I naturally became the sole ruler of ice, the ruler of all ice elemental creatures and elves. If the ruler of ice was a divine concept, and I had indeed created the Hades plane, it wouldn't be wrong to say that the entire death plane was my divine kingdom. In that case, I now had a power level that was suitable for this divine concept. Since the Great Snow Mountain Magical Realm was still connected to He's mortal plane, I would naturally be able to borrow their power. Right now, as I was explaining the ultimate concept of ice, the ice elves arrived as promised. They weren't bystanders who were attracted here by the powerful mana waves of my forbidden spell. Instead, they were subjects summoned by the ruler of ice. They were a part of the newly born ice elemental plane. Once enough ice elves gathered, the surrounding world would naturally begin to transform into an elemental plane. Perhaps this effect would seem quite similar to the most common saint-rank ice domain, but the true effect would be as different as the difference between heaven and earth. And so, the powerful undead lords entered the ice elemental plane as if they were fish on shore. Their soul fire was frozen, and they fell into eternal slumber. And so, the current me was just like an elemental god casting an elemental forbidden spell in his own elemental plane. My words were the spell itself. I didn't need any high-level magical incantations. All I had to do was state my will. For these ice elemental elves, my words were like the ruler of ice's grand command. The land of ice and snow is endless. If you look down from above, everything will be snow-white. Ice elves wandered around, with the living at the center. The surrounding plants were frozen to death, and the white frost on the ground began to spread, returning everything to snow white. An icy storm comes without warning, but if you step into it, the living shall be buried under the ice and snow, while the dead shall be eternally buried in the ice. This is the rule of the great snow mountain. The ice elves danced and sang in the snowy night. A snowstorm suddenly appeared in the sky without any warning. The aerial undead mysteriously fell into the snowstorm, falling into eternal slumber in droves. Meanwhile, a large amount of snow mysteriously accumulated on the land of ice and snow. Of course, this is only the beginning. Once the ice elemental era begins, it will last for several 100,000 years. For ordinary creatures, this will be an eternity. That's why this will also be the end of life. The ice elves cried tears of sorrow, but they transformed into ice crystals in the sky. However, the entire world began to freeze over. But don't be sad, because the seeds of life shall slumber in the ice and snow. The strongest species shall evolve in the season of ice and snow. New life shall rule the world once more in several tens of thousands of years. And this great cause of changing generations shall be known as the Ice Age. Damn it, why did the silly cat bite me? A familiar pain in my head interrupted my recitation. Although I paused in surprise for a moment, I then instantly came to my senses. After getting angry, I also felt grateful. I glanced at the situation around me as my back was covered in cold sweat. I had almost made a huge mistake. You really intend to turn this place into an elemental plane? Some things would be difficult to finish once they started. Even though I was quite careful, it was still too much for me to control such a spell as a saint rank. If it wasn't for the silly cat's interruption, I probably would have finished reciting my understanding of Ice Age. Perhaps I would have ended up in an even worse situation than if I had been hit by the original Ice Age spell. Actually, I had learned quite a lot from the Battle of the Hades. I also had many ideas about the original Ice Age spell. As long as I had enough time, perhaps I would be able to create an extended version of Ice Age, or even a strengthened version of it. I could sense that my ice element affinity and elemental magic knowledge were rapidly improving, and I was already filled with anticipation for the strengthened version of Ice Age. Of course, I had nearly cast Ice Age just now, so I wouldn't say something like, "I'll do better next time, and it'll definitely be even more powerful." It's my first time using it, so I didn't control the power well. I'll be more careful next time. There's still a next time. How do you think we should deal with this? As far as the eye could see, it was a complete mess. Harlow's triple forbidden spell was the perfect way to control the situation. I had only cast half of my ice elemental dimensional transformation spell, but it was already a fatal blow after I had controlled the situation. The undead lords who had happily come to the mortal plane to enjoy their flesh and souls suffered heavy losses this time. Apart from the blasphemy beholder and a few of the strongest undead lords, the undead army had been completely wiped out. The remaining undead lords unhesitatingly ran as far away as they could. They were no idiot. They knew that they would likely die a mysterious death if they were cannon fodder in this battle. The mortals below me weren't having a good time either. Fortunately, they were directly below me, and I had instinctively avoided them. This spell didn't directly attack them, but the rapidly decreasing temperature in the surroundings caused them to enter a frigid winter. It was now a scene of chaos below me. A cold wind blew past, and the soldiers on the city walls were all hugging each other to keep warm. Their thin spring and autumn clothes were no match for the current environment. However, the ice spirits in the surroundings hadn't dispersed yet, and I hadn't used up all the mana I had received from the Great Snow Mountain. If I left them alone, they would soon disappear. And so, in order to avoid wasting mana and to express my apology, I suddenly had an idea and used all the mana I had accumulated and the ice spirits on my next spell. Are you sure that they'll think that you're apologizing and not killing them? The silly cat immediately poured cold water on my plan when she learned of my plan through our soul connection. Being frozen is still better than being eaten by the undead. Besides, do you think that I'll care about what others think? Of course. I won't. Right, let's use my blueprint instead. Your blueprint is too ugly. The silly cat was quite interested in helping me create the spell model for my next spell. It was naturally a good thing that someone else could help me out. Fine, fine. You elves are still the best at this. Chapter 521. While Roland was still excitedly preparing his new spell, a small team of mercenaries was already waiting outside the ruins. Barton, who was leading the team, finally told them their goal and reason for coming here. At this moment, in the temporary camp, Barton was speaking with confidence. He was both boosting the mercenaries' morale and giving them their mission. The mercenaries and their companions all seemed to be looking forward to the upcoming battle. Our mission this time is quite important, but it's risky and rewarding. If we succeed, we'll cut off the undead calamity's path of retreat, and we'll definitely receive the title of hero that you've all been dreaming of. You won't have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of your lives. Mercenaries weren't volunteer soldiers. Trying to reason with them would be useless. Only the benefits would be worth it. But that alone wasn't enough. No matter how high the rewards were, no one would do a mission that was certain death. There was money to be earned and money to be spent. And now, just by looking at the surface, entering the undead's lair was a mission that was certain death. These mercenaries were willing to come here partly because of the promised rich rewards, and partly because they believed that old Barton, who was also a mercenary, wouldn't be so stupid as to die. According to what that person said, we don't need to fight the undead with swords and spears. Our main opponents will be the little metal cuties in the ruins. Our goal is to send my daughter to a specific location in the ruins, so you don't need to know what to do, because you won't understand even if I tell you. What you need to do is what you're best at. Use your swords to open a path. Yes, as long as we find the link, we can try to regain control of the Sky Tower. It's enough as long as you can bring me and this little girl there. I'll take care of the rest, Timlad added. Originally, Roland had wanted this great engineer to stay behind and help defend the city, but when he considered that it would be impossible to complete this mission without Timlad, he finally allowed Timlad to come with them. Relax, I won't be a burden. As he joked around, Timlad even did a bodybuilding pose, causing everyone to intentionally suppress their laughter. Of course, nobody took Timlad's words seriously. Nobody really felt that Timlad would be a burden. After all, Timlad was a famous myth-ranked hero. In fact, everyone's trust and reliance on Timlad's character and power level was obviously more than the dragon Lich's terrifying true form. Barton didn't have to worry too much about this. After all, even an important person like Barton was willing to take the risk. At the very least, this proved that this wasn't a dead end. Barton's good reputation in the past also greatly boosted the morale of the ordinary mercenaries, even giving them the illusion that they were saving the world. Now then, I'll explain. Our first goal is to reach the very top of the Sky Tower. According to the Sky Tower's special design, that's the deepest level. But even if there aren't any high-level undead in the tower, those mechanical guards are still quite dangerous. But this is also an opportunity for us. I have a plan. First, we need to find a large mechanical guard that's left behind. The plan was quite old-fashioned. It was nothing more than taking advantage of the fact that the main battlefield was attracting the undead's attention to ambush the undead's vitals. However, there was no need to worry about old-fashioned tactics as long as they were practical. As long as Roland was able to attract the undead's attention from the main battlefield, it would be best if he could force the undead emperor to call for reinforcements. That would naturally leave more and more openings in the enemy's lair. And, with Timlad, an expert from the Halettim generation, on our team, it would be much easier to explore the Halettim generation's ruins. While Timlad was explaining his plan to everyone, He was constantly observing the bald old man who was being so careful with his daughter. Apart from being an expert on this mission, Timlad's second task was to give the bald old man a score. Let me see whether or not you're worthy of that person's attention. You want to become the core of that person's new plan? You can't be like this right now. A commander who places too much importance on personal relationships is completely unqualified. Strange, why is it that he's always able to find someone who's very capable? He's never made a mistake. Could it be that there are so many talented people in the world? Or are there really people who are born with the ability to see the future? Or is it true that he's a prophet who has the ability to see the future? Even though Roland had taken out those mystical pictures of his prophecy, Timlad hadn't believed in the so-called prophecy. After all, pictures could be fake. And as a pure engineer and former soul expert, the more Timlad researched, the less he believed that there was someone capable of seeing the future with so many causal factors involved. Even Timlad, who had experienced the cycle of reincarnation's inheritance, felt rather lost when he thought about the illusory concept of fate and prophecy. But it was still possible to explain how a novice would become a hero just by watching him throw a ball. But it was quite difficult to explain how Roland had mysteriously trusted Olivia and Roland completely and unconditionally supported Roland and Olivia. Back in the day, Roland had basically given everything he had to help two novice researchers with their research. The two novice researchers were quite discouraged by the fact that Roland would definitely succeed. But whether or not a researcher would be able to produce results wasn't just a factor of strength. Luck was even more important. Compared to how sly Roland was normally, Roland's trust in Roland and Olivia was completely unreasonable. It's the same this time. Roland directly told me that Roland has the talent to be a commander, and that he has the potential to become a super powerful individual. Not long ago, Roland was just an old mercenary who couldn't even make it to the top. He's long past his prime, so I can't understand him at all. I'm afraid that there's no other explanation for this apart from prophecy. Even though Timlad was muttering to himself, he didn't intend to discuss this topic with Roland. Although it was difficult to understand the concept of prophecy, and an existence who could control fate would make Timlad feel powerless, it was reassuring to have a prophet who always stood on the winning side on Timlad's side. And most importantly, we're following Roland not because he's a prophet or because he has a bright future ahead of him, even though I've always felt that he was just bluffing when he said that he could predict the end of the world. That's what all evil cultists do. Timlad shook his head and tossed all these thoughts to the back of his mind. His arrogant words from back in the day had already become reality. His prophecy about the end of the world had already become a real threat. His unrealistic dreams from back in the day had already become his work goals and missions that he was about to accomplish. Of the people who had shared the same dreams back in the day, some had left, and some had died on the way. But even more of them had personally turned their dreams into reality. Since Roland had already fulfilled his promise from back in the day, it didn't matter if he kept anything from them. At the very least, we'll trust him and follow him to the end. Timlad didn't need to say the decision he made in his heart out loud. Instead, it would become an unreliable vow. The little Timlad from back in the day was now a major character that everyone looked up to. Yet, he still hoped that he and his family would have a decent future. And now, the entire Northlands, Hades, faction was only hoping that the world would be a bit more decent and that the mortals would have a slightly better life. Currently, the person that Timlad viewed as a prophet was rather vexed. No matter what, she's still the creator goddess of creation. She's definitely the system's GM. Can't you make another prophecy? The world's current prophecy is far too far off from the truth. The original prophecy can't even be used as a reference anymore. This means that you've indeed done an excellent job. However, it's impossible to make a second prophecy. Actually, my prophecy is nothing more than a simulation. I borrowed the power of the Creator Goddess to use the dimensional laws of time and space to predict what's going to happen. Such an ability requires a tremendous amount of energy, and there's a limit to how much energy I can use it. It's definitely impossible for me to make another prophecy in the current world. And you can logically infer that even if I was at my peak, I still wouldn't be able to make another prophecy. As expected, my system rejected my prophecy. But when I thought about it carefully, I realized that there was no need for her to lie. What she said was completely logical as well. You're good at prophecy, but you can't prophesy yourself? In that case, the limitation is that as long as you do something, the prophecy will be nothing more than nonsense. I had a sudden realization. I didn't understand any of the vague prophecies that you were telling me about, but I understood when you explained prophecy as a type of logical deduction based on reality. It was just that your deduction was supported by the dimensional laws of time and space, making it 100% accurate. Since prophecy was theoretically only a type of prediction of the future, it was completely understandable why Cavendish and I didn't exist in the strategy she gave me back then. She believed that the prophecy was something the Creator Goddess had made, and that the moment she saw the prophecy's original result was changed. Logically speaking, it was impossible for a prophecy to be completely true to begin with. As long as a prophecy was made and someone saw it, the future would definitely change. That was because a prophecy couldn't possibly include the prophecy itself. And since prophecy was based on the dimensional laws of time and space, just like a calculator simulation, the system that made the prophecy was the first variable. I, who knew about the prophecy and changed it, became the second variable. The existences that I changed became the new variable. As more and more variables accumulated, the amount of computing power needed for the prophecy would exponentially increase. Naturally, the cost of making a prophecy would exponentially increase as well. This was also why my system said that a second prophecy was impossible. In that case, this prophecy could only be used once every few thousand years, when everyone related to the previous prophecy had died. That would be quite useless. TSK, this cheat is only a one-time use, and it's already gone. How useless. Be content. Or, do you think that Cavendish's Cynthia is better? That's indeed a cheat in the style of Long Outyen. Do you want to try it? Now that I thought about it, killing all my parents, killing all my brothers, destroying all my countries, and killing all the gods and Buddhas in my way. The greater the hatred, the faster my power level would improve. This was truly the treatment of a Long Outyen main character. But personally, I felt that I should forget about it. It didn't match my style at all. I shook my head and gave up on the idea of asking my system for a guide. Actually, I hadn't had much hope in the beginning. After all, I hadn't relied on any sort of prophecy to reach my current level. However, I secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It wasn't that I didn't trust my system. It was that prophecy abilities and fate instinctively made me feel uneasy. Everything had already been determined. It was as if the prophecy system was denying the efforts of ordinary people. It would be far more realistic to have a super-powerful prophecy. But now wasn't the time to think too much. My second wave of spells was quite successful. Even though there wasn't an Ice Queen singing "Let It Go" as she danced, I still had enough mana to support me. I also had the help of an Ice and Snow Master, an Ice Elf, and an Ice Queen's meticulous design. Soon, a beautiful, dreamy ice castle appeared in the world. This ice castle had a classic elven style. The decorations were extravagantly beautiful. However, the main facilities seemed to be for giants to use. At the very least, the mega catapults on the castle walls were astonishingly powerful. However, even the snow bombs used as ammunition were several meters tall. It was obvious that ordinary humans wouldn't be able to use them. The ice castle's surface area perfectly covered the expanded Starwood City. The castle walls, which were the main defensive facilities, were more than 70 meters tall. Apart from Titan giants, no other giant would be able to pass through. Even if I hadn't been insane enough to add the ability to freeze the city walls, this icy cold city would still be unfriendly to ordinary people. The only thing worth celebrating was that it was currently the middle of summer and autumn, so the temperature wasn't too high. I had also taken off my fake mustache to disguise myself. Since I had already done so much, there was no longer any need to hide many things. It would be far too rude of me to cover my face when I faced the faint gazes from the south. Long time no see. How have you been? Chapter 522. It's truly been a long time. Conservation. Soul spying was a mutual thing. The familiar soul wavelengths she emitted allowed me to know who she was. However, this existence was the one I didn't want to see the most right now. Indeed, it's been a long time. But, if possible, I really don't want to see you again. Yongyet. This was a wondrous feeling. When that person's voice reached me, and she herself appeared in the distance, the entire world seemed to come alive. The grass was now green and the clouds were white. However, everything seemed to have been colored by someone else. She stood there, and the entire world seemed to be dyed in color. She appeared while sitting on a gigantic bone giant. This bone giant was as large as a mountain, and there was a gigantic throne made of bones on its head. She quietly sat there, and her long dress, which resembled both royal and mage robes, fluttered in the wind. Even though conservation was clearly no different from an ant compared to the gigantic bone giant, everyone's attention was attracted to her. Everyone ignored the gigantic bone giant below her. This wasn't something ethereal like aura or physical appearance. This was a special privilege she was born with. This is truly ridiculous. Her perfect face seemed to have some flaws. Her soft and smooth skin seemed to be split into two halves. The left side of her skin was white, while the right side was crimson. The left side of her hair was silver white, while the right side of her hair was fiery orange-red. As for what she looked like, since she didn't want others to know, it was likely that mortals wouldn't even have the right to look directly at her. Seeing conservation like this, the next instant, even though I didn't intentionally use my natural talent ability, my eyes changed. One side transformed into a black pupil with white pupils, while the other side transformed into a black pupil with white pupils. It was just like the two halves of the Tai Chi diagram. The stare of the Hell God was capable of seeing through one's soul, as well as distorting where one's soul belonged. Meanwhile, my strongest natural talent ability was something that I had only obtained after analyzing Zero's secret to creating clones. Her understanding of energy and the world had given me the theoretical foundation to create my eyes. She's even stronger than Aso. No, she's on a completely different level. However, communication, combat, was mutual. It was likely that conservation had gained even more from that battle than I had. I dissected her doppelganger back then, so I could naturally assess her abilities. At that time, she definitely couldn't be as strong as she is now. In my soul's perspective, conservation's existence was incomparably tremendous. She was just like a sun that illuminated all things. Just the light that she released caused the surrounding scenery to be lit up with her colors. The quality of a soul was directly proportional to the undead's power level. However, in my eyes, conservation's soul's quality seemed to be limitless. It was impossible to truly have limitless energy. That would go against the basic dimensional laws of the mortal plane. However, some existences had the special right to break the laws. There's no limit to the power level of an undead emperor. It was possible for it to be extremely strong, but the clone from before had clearly not reached this level. This was too ridiculous. Simply. Main god level. The silly cat's judgment was correct. Breaking the so-called natural laws of the world was one of the main god's special privileges. And judging from the pressure I was feeling, this ghost empress who was silently sitting there was no weaker than the main gods who had participated in the Battle of Hades. Astria, why did you let the sovereign descend just like that? What's wrong with your dimensional defense system? I can't sense Cynthia anymore. The dimensional laws have become chaotic. Don't treat past experience as an iron law. Not only that, this undead emperor's abilities are quite unique. The dimensional laws might not be able to restrict her. Be careful. Since she's capable of making herself infinitely large, she's naturally capable of making herself infinitely small as well. She obtained critical knowledge from you and took the most important step forward. Even though Astria had lost her physical body and abilities, she still had her experience. Astria's judgment was unquestionable. The conservation before me was probably the most troublesome opponent I had ever faced. After all, even when I faced a main god before, I had already prepared a trump card. And this time, it was like I had caught a shark while fishing. Yongye, you've become weaker. Those little toys from before were so embarrassing. While I was still hesitating, conservation spoke up first. Her seemingly mocking words were actually spoken in an incredibly calm tone. I could sense that she had no intention of mocking me at all. She was simply stating the truth. She was simply stating the truth. She was stating the fact that I was currently weaker than she had expected. She was stating the fact that all of my techniques, including Yongye City and forbidden spells, were nothing more than useless little toys. She was stating the fact that she didn't take me seriously at all. Damn it, you're just saying things that don't hurt you. If I had your current power level, I wouldn't need to play any little trick. I would have defeated you long ago. Even if she was speaking the truth, I naturally wouldn't say such discouraging words on the battlefield. It was fine if I couldn't win, but I wouldn't lose in battle if I couldn't win. Empty words were worthless. I really am ridiculously weak right now. But, didn't a certain undead emperor only dare to show up after I cast my spell? I didn't believe that she would show up at such a time. Such a short distance was nothing to her. It was likely that she had been coldly watching as her cannon fodder was killed off. She was certain that I wasn't even at the level of an undead emperor right now, which was why she had decided to show up. Slyness, caution, and so many backup plans. These are all qualities that an undead emperor, who is viewed as the mortal enemy of all the heretics in the mortal plane, should have. But it's such a headache to see such qualities appear on an enemy, and an enemy with an advantage in power level. While I was still thinking about how to deal with this, the people below me were still panicking. Although Harlois had only shouted 2 sentences from afar, the words Yongye and Undead Emperor carried far too much weight. I didn't have the time to care about other people's business with conservation's threat before me. However, I also wouldn't be able to let panic spread. Idiots! Does it matter who the opponent is? Who cares about those ancient legends that are so distant from us? He's helping us right now. Didn't you see it for yourselves? Sulima's angry roar echoed throughout the entire city. As the current highest-ranked commander of the city, Sulima's calmness also helped to calm the entire situation down considerably. Of course, there were also plenty of looks of fear and panic behind my back. It would seem that I would need to contact the fairies and see if they could help me clear my name. Don't even think about it. Yongye is still the ultimate demon king in all horror stories. That's because you went too far back in the past. TSK. Then why don't you make up some **T story that Yongye is already dead, and that I'm just an ordinary person who obtained his soul inheritance? Would anyone actually believe such a ridiculous story? In this day and age, it's quite common for public opinion to change as long as you're willing to spend money. Not to mention, you're just trying to twist the truth. What are you trying to make up now? I'd rather die than believe you. The silly cat's **T helped me relax slightly. Harlois, who had returned to her human form, also gave me solid support. Perhaps my personal power level was no match for the current conservation, but I had the Mage Tower and Harlois, who was just as powerful as I was. Meanwhile, conservation was all by herself. If my inference was correct, it was still possible for us to win this battle. Even if you're stronger than me, are you certain that you'll be able to obtain the final victory? You shrunk your body into this cage. Aren't you afraid that you'll break the cage and be directly thrown out? Conservation didn't respond. However, the sudden appearance of the undead army was the best answer to her attitude. When the two undead emperors fought, the countless cannon fodder undead clashing against each other was only the beginning of this grand show. At this moment, I finally began to miss Amelia and Renee, who I didn't even know where they were. At the very least, they should be quite capable of fighting now. That's what men are like. They only think of others when they need them. Normally, they hide as far away from them as possible. How heartless. I agree. Shut up. If you're so free, why don't you help me think of something? There was no lighting in the dark ruins. There were only dim indicator lights flashing at intervals. That was because the residents here didn't need any form of illumination. However, this place wasn't a forbidden zone for all life as the outside world imagined. It was just that the residents here were quite unique. 7324-234-2342 A345-2423 22D34 SATA 2312BB450 Numbers and simple letters replaced the usual accents and prophecies. The mechanical residents here communicated with each other using mechanical code. Most of the residents here had rather strange appearances. There were golems for guards, cleaning puppets, and puppets for children's playmate. But right now, all of them were communicating with each other in a simple and efficient manner. Only the beeping of indicator lights and the strange sound of electricity could be heard. What they were busy with was using metal and bones as raw materials, starting from skeletons and dragon bones to construct war machines. The strange bone giants that Roland saw on the battlefield that day were the most commonly seen. Most of the newest species had already lost their humanoid forms. There were 6 armed swordsmen praying mantises, half-tank, half-skeleton generals, and strange toys that had a giant wheel and 2 giant arms. As long as the design was reasonable, all sorts of slaughter weapons were being created. No matter what this place had originally been used for, it had now been transformed into individual workshop. Countless strange parts were being sent out as machines rumbled about. However, what was sent out were all slaughter weapons. No matter who it was that controlled these ruins, at the very least, that person definitely wasn't a peaceful person. I'm afraid that none of us will have any hope against these things on the battlefield. Of course. That's why we're here. We're here to save the world. However, some people were whispering to each other in the pitch-black darkness. If you don't want to die, shut up. Barton's shout caused everyone else to fall silent. However, Barton wasn't making any empty threats at all. After all, they were currently inside the body of a gargoyle that was constantly making noises. They were also slowly walking through all these strange mechanical puppets. It was also thanks to the noisy mechanical noises that they were making. Otherwise, they would have been discovered long ago. Timlad's plan was quite simple yet practical. He would wait for a mechanical puppet and rewrite his orders so that everyone could hide inside the mechanical puppet and go as far as possible. Were they discovered? Were they being interrogated midway? That didn't matter. They would go as far as possible. If they couldn't go any further, they would just kill their way down. Although Timlad's plan seemed rather reckless, there was far too much information that he didn't know. Making too many calculations and making things too complicated would actually make it easier for problems to occur. This plan of taking things one step at a time would actually have a higher chance of success. Up until now, this unreliable plan had been progressing quite smoothly. Timlad had only given the order for the gargoyle to go to the lowest level. This gargoyle had already reached the 10th level without anyone stopping it. Even if someone occasionally tried to communicate with it, the gargoyle would simply mumble something to it without even realizing that it had something in its stomach. Everything went smoothly. Just as everyone was overjoyed at how smoothly things went, Timlad, who had always been on high alert, finally spoke up. He had been abnormally silent the entire time. They're finally here? Who's here? The next instant, Barton knew that he had asked for nothing. The gargoyle that he and his group were on suddenly turned and entered a plaza. There were already cannons and guardian gargoyles waiting in front of him. This was a trap. You knew about this long ago, didn't you? Of course. You think that you can enter the Sky Tower's guardian base just by rewriting a mechanical puppet's orders? That's ridiculous. We were discovered from the very start. Even though Barton couldn't see Timlad's face clearly in the pitch-black interior, his arrogant tone made everyone want to punch him in the face. Then why did you bring us here? Of course. We have something on us that it needs, so it would definitely let us in. This is much more comfortable than killing its way in one level at a time. It's far more patient than we thought it would be. It beat it at its own game and directly went down to the 10th level. Ha 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 ha, I'm such a genius. Barton and the others couldn't believe it. Timlad was actually a legendary hero who was laughing so narcissistically while making his teammates suffer. Only the mercenary Mary, who was also from the Northlands, sighed as if she had expected this. As expected of Beifeng's best friend, a high-ranking member of the Gentleman Alliance. Although he's trustworthy, he's merciless when it comes to making his teammates suffer. The moment he heard this, Timlad's smug expression instantly collapsed. Who said that? I don't know that bastard. Don't make things up. If I'm treated as Beifeng's follower, I'll be burned to death in the plaza. I'll become a vengeful spirit that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Right? Isn't that guy the former leader of the Gentleman Alliance? That means that you're all his subordinates. Please don't say any more. This is the dark history of our entire team. We've already decided to bury it in the past. If you insist on bringing up this topic, are you intending to challenge the oath that all 12 of our team leaders made? If Roland was here, he would probably ask just what Beifeng had done to make Timlad, who used to be his friend, not dare to recognize him. Even Beifeng's subordinates did their best to erase all traces of Beifeng's existence. From today onwards, none of us know that man. Yes, he's not even from the Northlands. Alright then, even though they were surrounded by enemies, they actually came to an agreement on this topic.